Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? Great. Sorry, we were having some technical difficulties with the projector, but I think we're good now. So we're gonna get started and try to get back on track for our timing. But thank you everybody for coming. Some of you made some long drives up this morning. We really appreciate it. VCDA has these conferences twice a year in multiple locations, so maybe the next one will be a little closer to home for you. Stay tuned. For those that don't know me, I am Julia Connell. I work as a community development specialist for the Department of Housing and Community Development, and I have recently become the VCDA board president. I took over from Jenna Kolosky, who has transitioned out of her role at VCRD. Jenna was our longtime president for about 8 or 9 years. So I just want to give a big thank you to Jenna for all that she did for the last couple of years. For today, we are going to be talking about funding resources, so a very important topic. Some of you are here to learn about funding resources that will help projects you're working on in your community. Some of you are here to talk about funding sources that you work for. What can those funding sources do? Who can they help? And how can folks comply? That's a big part of today's discussion as well. So thank you everyone for joining. We're gonna hear today from some amazing panelists that work on different types of resources, a presentation from the City of St. Albans on funding sources that they've been able to use to help support their community. And then some of you will even get a chance to go on a walking tour this afternoon, if you're brave enough to venture out in the cold. Otherwise, we'll have breakout groups at the end of the day. Some logistics that I just want to mention for folks. If you parked in the parking garage over on Hampton Lane, there was a code emailed to you if you registered for free parking. It's through the Park mobile app. The code is Conference 25, so be sure to use that so that you can take advantage of the city's generosity for free parking today. Bathroom facilities are in the back of the room. We also have a handout table, resource table in the back of the room on this side that will have a lot of information that you'll hear about today. There's QR codes for some links to other websites. There's information on different funding sources. And then there's also some little goodies from our sponsor, White and Burke. So please be sure to look at that throughout the day. There are VCDA board members around the room who can help assist with anything else you need. We have some wonderful coffee and pastries this morning from the Traveled Cup right next door. And then lunch will be here later on from Nellie's. So now I'm gonna just turn it over to our keynote speaker, Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, Lindsay Curley. So thank you, Secretary Curley, for being here today, and I will let you get started.
Thank you, Julia. Hi, everyone. I have the pleasure of getting you warmed up today. It is such an honor to be here. My name is Lindsay Curley. I'm the Secretary of the Vermont Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and I want to thank the Vermont Community Development Association for the honor of kicking you off this morning. I've seen a tremendous agenda and opportunities for all of us to learn more about funding and partnerships and technical assistance, and we get to do it right here in St. Albans, which has undergone such an amazing transformation, thanks in part to TIF, or tax increment financing, which is overseen by my agency, but also some people that are here in the room. Over here, it looks like they're trying to fix a few things, but really, your city looks amazing, so thank you for hosting us. So you'll also get to hear today from some of our members of our team, Housing and Community Development Commissioner Alex Farrell and Patrick Sheld of the Vermont Community Development Program will be on panels later this morning. And of course, the president of the VCDA board is Julia Connell, and who's also a community development specialist at the Department of Housing and Community Development. This afternoon, Julia will be leading a discussion during a walking tour of the city, and I've had the opportunity to do that, and it's great. So if you get an opportunity to join in, please do. And Julia, thank you for making this happen for us. So as a state, we face many challenges, including education funding, a housing shortage, and an aging population, which is shrinking our workforce. And if any of you listened to the governor this week, he pointed out in his inaugural address, the list is daunting, but we must start somewhere. He urged us to prioritize housing and education as these areas offer the greatest potential for making our state more affordable. Now, I'm not the education secretary, so I will let Zoe Saunders speak to education, but I am the Commerce Secretary, and I do recognize that increasing our housing stock not only empowers communities to thrive by growing the grand list, but it also creates the stability needed for our families to grow. And by making our housing more affordable and attractive, we can attract out-of-state working couples with school-age children to our state, ultimately contributing to stronger enrollment in our schools. So this is a key part of our agency's mission. The recent housing needs assessment finds that Vermont needs to add between 24,000 and 36,000 rental and owner-occupied homes by 2029 to meet current and future demand. In Franklin County, the estimate is 1,300 to 2,200. But an examination of building permit data demonstrates why these goals are a very heavy lift. Only about 2,200 building permits are issued statewide today. That's less than half of what we need. Vermont also loses between 500 and 600 homes each year due to age and disrepair, which only compounds our problem. Recent summer floods have exacerbated those losses. In July of 23, and again on the same day in July of 2024, 856 homes were completely destroyed. In 2023, more than 37 homes were damaged. And we don't have a final tally on the 24 damages yet from FEMA. These numbers don't include winter flooding during 2023. It's indisputable that Vermont's lack of housing negatively impacts our families, our employees, our communities. That's why we're seeing employers who are not in the real estate business investing in workforce housing, because the housing market has not been able to keep up with the demand that they need to have for their employees to have a decent place to live. Right now, many Vermonters have long commutes because they can't afford to live near their workplace. Not only is that bad for emissions and the environment, but long commutes also create a barrier to hiring and employee retention, which are already difficult given our very tight labor market. The lack of housing also restricts our ability to recruit new talent and young families to Vermont. You hear the governor say all the time, we need more taxpayers, not more taxes. But we hear from businesses about efforts to recruit a candidate from out of state who likes the job and want to move, only to have that person ultimately turn the job down in the end because they can't find a suitable place to live. Our insufficient housing stock is a roadblock to our businesses achieving success and to bringing new Vermonters into the fold. Affordable housing is subsidized, and the high-income earners can afford to build or buy, but there's a serious gap when it comes to middle-income housing, hampering our ability to bring people to Vermont to take some of the great jobs that Vermont has to offer. Homes should not only be designed with growing families in mind, but also for retirees who are looking to downsize to smaller, more affordable homes that are tailored to these seniors. We can free up larger family homes currently occupied by just 1 or 2 people. These 1 and 2 bedroom, 1-story minimalist models often align with the needs of first-time home buyers as well. By boosting the supply of these smaller homes, we address multiple challenges. We help the homeless by increasing available housing stock, provide more options for home buyers and renters, and put downward pressure on prices. This increase in housing inventory leads to higher grand lists, which in turn supports municipalities in funding both essential services and quality of life initiatives. Furthermore, homes designed for families help ensure that our schools are filled with young students, building a stronger community for the future. We all need to be advocating for better housing policies so that every Vermonter can enjoy a home of their own that they can afford. So let's talk about how we can boost communities by rehabilitating existing housing, give new life to former housing, and build new homes that reflect the needs of our current and future populations. This will create a more balanced and sustainable housing market that works for everyone in Vermont. Vermont's Community Development Program administers the Community Development Block Grant Program, or CDBG, and distributes about $7 million annually in federal funding to support a variety of community development activities. These flexible funds help enhance community vibrancy by supporting projects like recovery housing, affordable home repair, housing counseling services, and food access initiatives such as the Abenaki Food Pantry in Swanton. Vermont's 20,000 mobile homes are an important part of the state's affordable housing mix. So the Rapid Response Mobile Home Infill Program is working on adding 150 new mobile homes by January of 2026. This program, which is a cross-agency effort, uses state money to identify vacant lots in mobile home parks across the state to construct new foundation pads on them. Meanwhile, the Vermont State Housing Authority is working to identify qualifying homeowners who can purchase at cost designated energy-efficient mobile homes. It's really a special program that will help hundreds of Vermonters achieve their dream of home ownership. We're just getting it off the ground and hope to announce our first closing soon. Keeping people in their homes is another important piece of our housing efforts. The Mobile Home Improvement and Repair Program makes grants available to increase accessibility and repair roofs, water systems, heating systems, and more. The program also helps park owners make upgrades that benefit residents. To date, the Mobile Home Improvement and Repair Program has spent $428,000 helping 34 homes in Franklin County. Another tactic we're employing is to revitalize rental units that have fallen into disrepair and gone offline. As I mentioned before, the Housing Needs Assessment finds Vermont loses between 500 and 600 homes annually, further eroding our housing stock. A program called the Vermont Housing Improvement Program, or VHIP, is instrumental in making them livable again. The average VHIP grant is $36,000 per apartment. That's a tremendous return on investment when you consider building an apartment in Vermont. Right now, an affordable apartment costs $500,000. The program has been hugely successful. In Franklin County, VHIP has helped get 45 units back online, with another 34 undergoing upgrades right now. Statewide, VHIP has rehabilitated more than 400 units in the last 2 years, restoring vibrancy and adding rental housing stock for low-income Vermonters and those exiting homelessness. There's also TIF, or tax increment financing. St. Albans is a shining star in Vermont's TIF program. TIF allows a municipality to invest in infrastructure like water and sewer, lending to private investments like housing and commercial property. As a result of St. Albans' success with TIF, the grand list in the Rail City is expected to grow by $83 million. But the reality is, Vermont's smaller communities are not taking advantage or able to take advantage of TIF because they lack the capacity to oversee projects and comply with the intricacies of the program. So we want to add a second option that would make it easier for our smaller towns to use this financing tool to revitalize communities. We're calling it SPARK, which stands for Strategic Projects for Advancing Rural Communities. With SPARK, builders would retain, for a period of time, what we refer to as the tax increment to help pay for the project. For those of you who are unfamiliar or need a refresher on this concept, tax increment is the new tax revenue generated from the development or the improvement made to the property. This is considered a win-win for the community because the creation of the infrastructure or development on this site is expected to spur further private investment, creating new homes, bringing in more residents, increasing the grand list, and boosting tax revenues. We are also intentionally putting together tools that will advance rural communities, like further reform on the Act 250 permitting and appeals process. Act 181 passed last year helped remove some roadblocks to bringing more homes online, but it didn't go far enough, especially for rural areas. So we are hoping to continue to tweak this session to bring more interim exemptions to more areas, especially those served by water and wastewater. That said, interim zoning exemptions are working. We have anecdotal evidence that developers are deciding to build more units after hearing Act 250 jurisdiction doesn't apply to projects that include up to 25 units. We need to keep the momentum going before the permanent tiered system comes online. Also, as part of Act 181, which was signed into law by Governor Scott, the legislature directed DHCD and the Vermont League of Cities and Towns to study the feasibility of creating a statewide land bank program, which some states like Maine use to turn blighted properties into thriving economic assets. We're also finalizing even more granular housing data to determine exactly what we'll need in the future. And we're building a housing dashboard that will show everyone in real time where we need homes and what is being built and where. Our goal is twofold. We want to make the lives of Vermonters easier while maximizing every dollar in order to make transformational investments. The fact is, we don't have the money that we had during the pandemic. That huge infusion of federal dollars is over. So creativity, relieving the barriers that make it unnecessarily unaffordable to build, innovation, and a can-do approach are a must going forward if we are going to achieve our goals. Everything is open for discussion. Not every suggestion is going to be viable or make it across the finish line, but my agency is devoted to increasing access for housing for Vermonters, and we're working diligently with our partners and studying all kinds of ideas. In Montpelier, we're just about 1 week into the new biennium. I must say I'm excited by the spirit of cooperation so far this session. Voters spoke in Montpelier, sending the message loud and clear that Vermont needs to be more affordable. Housing is a big piece of that. And I have personally heard from legislators who tell me they really want to move the needle on housing this session. And I've heard others in interviews pledge that they are set to roll their sleeves up and make meaningful action to boost our housing stock. And that's music to my ears. I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with them and to make a difference for all Vermonters. In closing, I'd like to ask something from all of you. Vermont needs your help. Please reach out to your lawmakers. You are not just community advocates, you're also constituents. Talk to your representatives and your senators about the need for housing in your communities. Share your ideas and your suggestions because your voice matters. Vermont cannot achieve its goals until we can successfully house more people in the places that they can afford. Finally, a big thank you to White and Burke and the rest of today's sponsors for making this conference a success. And thank you all for the work that you're doing and how hard you're working to help Vermont to thrive and to be vibrant. The agenda today is inspiring, and I'm excited to learn from all of you. And thank you all for your time, and let's have a great conference.
Thank you, Secretary Curley. As we've heard, there's no shortage of things going on at the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. So if you're someone working on a project or looking for more information on TIF districts or any of the other resources that Secretary Curley mentioned, make sure you talk to folks around the room today. At the end of the day, when we have the walking tour, we're also going to have breakout discussion groups. And I forgot to mention those this morning. I want to give you more information and say there'll be a breakout group on building a project budget, project-specific technical assistance and challenges, keeping momentum post-receiving funding awards, and then also those of you that want to venture out can go to the walking tour. So keep that in mind for the end of the day. If you have sort of specifics, there'll be different tracks you can go on for those breakout groups. And now we're going to hear from the City of St. Albans, City Manager Dom Cloud, for more information on how municipalities can fund projects and what their sources of local revenue are. So I'd like to invite Dom up. We'll get his presentation set up and then hear more from him.
I always wanted a roadie chip. This is great. Yeah. I was having kind of a proud papa moment as I was having you all here. And just like all those Facebook posts, they're nice to read, but admittedly they're a little bit cringy sometimes. And so with that as my disclaimer, I always try to be informative and educational, but if not, at least be entertaining. So to that end, I won't let the cringiness get in the way of a good story. And the St. Albans redevelopment story, it's a great story. It's, in many ways, it's an all-American story of a community pulling itself up by its bootstraps. When I listened to the governor's speech a week or so ago and Secretary Curley's comments this morning, they really resonated with me as a community leader and something that we hold dear in St. Albans, which is communities are uniquely positioned to confront the dual crises that we have around housing and education finance. As the Secretary mentioned, they're inextricably linked, and the answer is growth. And that's the challenge, right? Because in Vermont, we have a tenuous relationship with growth. It's on our terms. Our logo is a mountain. And one of the things about a crisis, however, is I'm fond of the phrase, never waste a crisis. And it's often attributed to Churchill. Obama used it in 2008. We used it a little bit with all due humility as part of our redevelopment. But Vermont has two crises. We have the housing crisis and we have the education finance crisis. And the answer is growth, and that's going to cause us to do things that we ordinarily wouldn't like to do. There's an implicit bias in Vermont that says it's pretty darn good the way it is. Don't change it. And growth means change. So one of the reasons that I think communities are uniquely positioned to lead that change is because our process for approval is so darn democratic. Everything that I'm going to show you in these slides has been voter approved. So with that as a opening preamble, I'm going to talk a little bit about the why. I'm going to make some of our assumptions explicit. Then I'm going to talk about the how, and we'll talk about some financial strategies. And then we'll pull the curtain back on 3 projects, try to get that done in 35 minutes or so, and take a few questions, if that's okay time-wise. So if you have one as we're going along, feel free to raise your hand, but know that there'll be time at the end. So a couple of my assumptions. Great communities are made. They don't just happen. Now, there's some implicit values in there, right? That has a nod to government intervention, that has a nod to public investment. It's not anti-market, but it's not just free market. Most great communities require a combination of public and private investment. That's the essence of TIF. But communities who don't make their public investments, or a whole state for that matter, shouldn't be surprised when the private sector won't either. Secondly, we are well versed in local government on local planning and regulation. It's in our frickin' DNA, right, to create a vision and tell everybody else what to do. But those are defensive strategies. They assume that the market can and will provide what your community envisions. It doesn't address market failure. What I'm going to talk about today are offensive strategies. They're not offensive, but they're projects and principles that show you how to get deals done, not how to stop deals. And finally, as I mentioned in my intro, Vermont communities are uniquely positioned. If I told you that you had a player who you could put on the field who had more access to capital than most, who could absorb more risk, who had to consider the cost of doing nothing when evaluating a project, and who every single project would be approved by the voters in that community. Wouldn't you want to put that player on the field? And that's Vermont communities. That's all of our cities and towns across the state. Everything that I'm going to tell you can be replicated in every community. Differently, but there's nothing in St. Albans that can't be done in any other community from a regulatory perspective, from a statutory authority perspective, maybe from a political leadership perspective, but this is very replicable. So let's talk about the how. Does that look like a designated growth center? Remember what I said about private investment? It has to follow public investment. Well, that was us 15 years ago. That's the shire town of Franklin County. The most powerful tool, as we've alluded to a couple of times, for attracting the type of development that a community envisions is tax increment finance. Nothing else comes close. Second place is the local option tax. But TIF is it's the bazooka, it's the Tom Brady, it's everything. If you have one take home that you should look into, it's how do we get more TIFs in the state of Vermont and how does my community get one? But as the Secretary alluded to, there's some hostility to TIFs. Historically, it's ebbing a bit in the legislature. And they can be complex. I didn't know anything about TIFs when I started. So we'll come back to a little bit later. But in the broad strokes, from a technical perspective, TIF allows the community to issue bonds for public improvements that can catalyze private investment. You pay the debt service on those bonds from both the municipal and the education tax revenues on the new development. You don't get all of the education tax revenues, you get most of them. I believe it's 70% of the current statute. So in broad strokes, this doubles your taxing capacity overnight. It is the quintessential public-private partnership. St. Albans has issued $23 million to date. Our official filings show that we're going to produce $83 million. Internally, we're shooting for $100 million. So $100 million in 20 years. That's a good day at the office. If we are serious about growing the statewide grand list and attracting new residents, I'd suggest communities should have unlimited access to TIF or a similar program. You can pick a different acronym. But you need to have unlimited access for housing projects. That's how we do it. I'm going to show you some slides. Everything that we've done here can be done in other communities, but this is how you get it done. TIF is how you go from this to that in 5 years. That's the parking garage you all parked in. It's how you go from that to that. It's how you go from there to there. Imagine if every community in the state was trying to do this, what we'd look like. We'd be embracing growth. I want to talk about the hairiest development project that I've ever been involved in. It's called the Fonda Redevelopment Project. I've been working on it for all of my 15 years. There's a part of me that thinks some of the complexity is initiated by the city council as part of a staff retention package, but nonetheless, we're getting there, and I tend to be here for a long time. So we bought Fonda for $350,000 the same year that I became the city manager. And Fonda was a 120,000 square foot warehouse that employed hundreds of people for decades in St. Albans. It was a well-regarded local employer. And their most well-known project, memorialized in a country music song, is the Red Solo Cup. They also made these little plates, plastic-coated paper products. There's the song, right? Plastic-coated paper products. And from time to time, people working there spilled some ink here and there. And that ink and the other industrial ingredients seeped into the concrete. There were no, to our knowledge, ongoing hazards or workplace safety issues. It was regarded as a top-shelf employer. If it was around today, it would have made the list of a good place to work, right? But when they left, it turned out that there were some TCEs and PCBs in the concrete. And so the city bought it in the early years of the Obama administration. Paid $350,000 for it. And In 2008, we had the ERA funds, American Reinvestment and Revitalization, and we got some ERA funds, and we began our redevelopment project. So we demolished the buildings and cleaned the soil that we could. But all of our engineers said, you really need to leave the concrete slab. It's going to be really expensive to get rid of that, and try to get a developer to build on top of it and cut out the bad stuff and work around it. That makes a ton of sense. It's very economical. But that advice was a big part of why the project languished for over a decade. So after that first phase, it looked like this for a long time. It's a 5-acre site located in a growth center. It had every designation known to man. But nobody, and I toured every developer in northwestern Vermont through the site. Nobody wanted to touch it because of the slab. So we continued to assemble redevelopment funding. And we got a pretty good list going. I'm giving you thematic elements here, not in accounting. At that point, we'd put about $1.6 million either into it or assembled. $1 million of that was TIF, some enterprise funds, water and wastewater, some general fund money. But the city had $1.6 million into it. We got the ERA money from the EPA, some money from the RPC. By this time, Biden was president. So we got some ARPA money. And thankfully, earmarks came back under congressionally directed spending, so we got a slug of money from HUD through the delegation and Senator Welch. So it's a 5-acre site. We're $6 million into it. That's all I got. Can't even play tennis on it. So we're pretty good at visioning in Vermont, right? It's not where it's easy for us to create new ideas. And by this time, this is post-pandemic. Now the biggest driver in Vermont is the housing crisis. Never waste a crisis. All right, we got to do a housing project. So we come up with a new vision. The moving train at that time was Cathedral Square. They were interested in doing a senior housing project, so we struck a deal with them to do 30-odd units of senior housing in the lower left-hand corner there. That was a great project, infused some capital, helped make it easier to get the rest of the deal done. But what drives tax increment financing is market rate housing. 80 to 120, housing for people that make a little bit less or a little bit more than most people in the region. And so we were offering a pretty sweet deal. Our standard model in St. Albans is we buy the land, we clean the land, and then we broker a development deal that implements what the community envisions. So free land, no water and sewer charges. It's the best deal going in northwestern Vermont. Nobody can touch it. But we still couldn't get off the dime until Treasurer Mike Pichak and the Vermont Housing Finance Agency announced $50 million in low-cost capital. This program now is known as LIAC, Local Investment Advisory Committee Funds. It's administered, most of the money's gone. It was administered through VHFA. But as we talk about one of the missing ingredients for unleashing housing development in Vermont, access to low-cost capital is key. So the city got serious about our development proposal. We went all in. We ramped up the consulting machine. We got White and Burke. We got our graphic designer. And we put forth a great proposal. And we were able to get $8 million, not in grants, just a loan. Another $2 million out of their rental revolving funds for around $10 million. Now we're in business. Now we can go to developers and say, hey, we've got $10 million for you to do this project. I know you can't borrow for less than 6 or 7. still have free land, no water and sewer charges. And that took us from here to here. So David and I are meeting tomorrow afternoon, hopefully to ink that deal. That's what it looks like. That's the overall. You can see the senior housing building in the lower corner. That's the rest of the market rate units. This is the kind of money it takes. So the city's in for $6 million. It's a 5-acre site, right? It's $1 million an acre. That's why there's the market failure. That's just to get you to the dance. It's nobody to dance with. Senior housing project invests $14 million. We did a 10,000 square foot commercial building for the railroad in the back corner of the property. $10 million, and I mentioned from VHFA, and then an additional $12 million in combination of debt and equity from the market rate housing developer. It's $45 million. That's why nobody touches the site. That's why we had to buy it. If we hadn't bought it, it'd still be sitting there. So here's the ROI on the Fonda project. At the time of acquisition, it was worth about $350,000. We spent $1.6 million. Final market value is $23 million. We got 120 units of workforce and senior housing. That's how you do robust housing development in Vermont. It's community-led. Everything that I'm telling you, I first pitched to the voters, and it passed by more than 2-1. If the voters said no, we would have backed out, sold the land, and they'd have had bigger problems. That's another story. So that's the Fonda project. Takeaways here are the communities can lead it because we have to consider the cost of doing nothing. We have more access to capital than anybody else. And if we don't do it, it's not going to happen. Second seed I want to plant is local option taxes for public improvements. I'm going to use an example of a pool in St. Albans, but it's replicable to anything that's popular. Local option taxes is the easiest money out there with the lowest risks. It's not as powerful as TIF, but it's much easier to get. Just takes voter approval at this point. And it's a great example of the states and the state and the municipalities working well together. The state collects it. They distribute it back to the towns. A little bit goes to other communities through the payment in lieu of taxes program, but it's the most efficient program out there. In St. Albans, while David and I were rapidly gentrifying the rest of the city, the pool was falling apart. The pool, like a lot of pools, was built in the 70s with land and water conservation funding money. To put it kindly, it had reached the end of its useful life. And we had another crisis. Pool was located in a working class community on land that the school owned. And every year we weren't sure if the pool was going to open. And there were all, which would be a huge impact, you know, if all of a sudden on June 1st, nobody can send their kids to day camp because the pool is closed. And that's not something that you just fix overnight. It was a very, very popular project. A lot of voter sentiment that we needed to do something about it. But I'm running a robust economic development program over on the other side of the house. The last thing I need is to be redirecting resources to this. So if we were going to pull this off, we needed some new capital. It's not a TIF project. General funds fully engaged in everything else. Enter the local option tax. But first we had to find a site. We couldn't do it here on the existing site. We gave it to a committee to come up with the recommendations about what we needed for a new pool. They, of course, said, well, we really think you ought to have 2 pools, one indoor and one outdoor. think you should find the new site. And about that same time, a local nonprofit called HARDAC had seen the work that the city had done on public-private partnerships and said, look, we want to do that with you on the nonprofit recreation side. We're going to give you 200 acres of land where there's an existing ski hill and a natural area, and we'll form a partnership. You guys run it, you guys own it, and we'll do a little fundraising, 30, 40 grand a year to run the ski hill. That's a nice place for a pool. So, but it was outside the city. And the city of St. Albans is the core urban area. The town of St. Albans completely surrounds it, which historically as a farming community is more and more of a suburban community. Most of our recreation programs are 60-40 town-city. So it was an obvious partnership between the city and the town. So the project moved along from a planning and visioning perspective. We were able to talk them out of 2 pools into, how about 1 pool with a dome over it? HARDAC was clearly the site, and if we're going to move it out of the city, maybe they could participate, right? So it was a $5 million nut, and we went to the town of St. Albans and said, you guys come up with 2.5, we'll come up with 2.5, and we'll build a great community asset. And both of us went to our respective voters. And in the city, it passed 3-1. In the town, it failed by, I think, 30 votes. COVID got in the middle of it. Some other people got in the middle of it. But nonetheless, the town was out. So I did the typical city manager thing. I said, all right, we're going to value engineer this thing. And I went back and started trying to trim it down and cut lanes, cut diving boards, that type of thing. And rolled that out in a public hearing, and the voters said, what are you talking about? Where's our pool? Put it back up there. All right. So we put it up again. Same proposal, and it passed again in the city, 3-1. So the local option tax generates about $700,000 a year. The pool debt service, Sarah, you in the room? I want to say that's around 350 or so of that. So a little more than half, about half or a little more. Never waste a crisis. You cannot sell a local option tax as a way to diversify revenues for the tax base. Nobody knows what the hell you're talking about, right? But you can sell it to pass a pool. So the city picked up $700,000 in new revenues. There's an annual policy that the council adopts. Of course, we put a little into the redevelopment fund, some financial rainy day fund stability, something for recreation programs. It's like a bill in the legislature, something for everybody, and the voters approve it. So this is what it looks like today. It's a brand new pool. It anchors the HARDAC redevelopment, the HARDAC recreation area. And all summer long, we get people coming up from Chittenden County, New York, surrounding communities, saying, gosh, I ought to move here. There's the rest of the site. And one of the things that begins to happen when you start making public investments is people get the bug. And so in the far corner there, you see a brand new playground. You wouldn't believe what a playground costs, almost as much as the pool. But that was totally privately fundraised. At the top of the hill, you'll see a ski lodge, which was totally privately fundraised. So success begets success. Takeaway here is the local option tax is second to TIF, but a lot easier to get. It's not going to be nearly as powerful, but it's interesting to watch that debate evolve. I used to work for the League of Cities and Towns in the 90s, and at that time, the fear was always, how can you even think about a local option tax you got to protect your Main Street businesses. And what's happened since then, of course, is the internet. And now what we're finding is communities can literally tax the internet and reinvest it on Main Street through the local option tax if they want to. You can do anything you want with that money. So, another reason why I think communities should lead the housing effort is because you can access these revenue streams and then propose to the voters what you're thinking of doing with that money. So it's one of the most powerful and democratic processes out there. And finally, a current deal that we're working on is the use of the historic tax credits. Many of you are familiar with these, and many in the room who are more knowledgeable about the technical aspects of it. But in broad strokes, it's a 30% tax credit when you use both of them. Municipalities, of course, don't pay tax. So how do municipalities take the lead in rehabilitating historic buildings for housing if they don't pay tax? Well, you form an LLC with the bank. This is the first time we've done this, and this is a building on Main Street called the Ralston Building. You'll walk by it today, I'm sure, and many of you probably walked by it on your way in. St. Albans has spent most of its ARPA money on redeveloping the downtown and investing in small businesses. And there was a vacancy in this corner for a long time. It was set up for micro retail, emphasis on the micro. And retail is really hard right now. And so we've been trying to help some of our building owners transition into where the opportunities seem to be, which a lot of it is in food, particularly hyper-local food. And so we did a deal with a local vegan food manufacturer called Nourish to use some of the ARPA money to renovate this building for his vegan manufacturing and restaurant. And what he found is that the wholesale side of it was much greater, more lucrative for him than the retail side. And so, the city was into that for 6 figures, took some heat for doing it, frankly, when the business left. But what began to happen then is we began to get a lot of interest from other restaurateurs who had an interest in operating a restaurant on that corner. This time, however, we talked with some other restaurant and food operators in the downtown, and what we learned is what was working for them was literally vertically integrating the building, so integrating the residential units up top with the restaurant downstairs to help get them through the lean months. And so instead of just leasing it out to another restaurant, the city decided to create 8 apartments on the upstairs. You look at this building, you think that's a classic mixed-use downtown building. There must, of course, be apartments up there. There aren't. There's clearly evidence that somebody has tried, but there aren't any because there's no 3-phase power to the building. That was a big part of it. And nobody could figure out how to make enough money to make the investment, partly because they hadn't explored using the historic tax credits. Now, the city is going to take a loss on this. I think it's going to be probably around $200,000-300,000 at the end. But that easily pays itself back with the creation of the additional housing, successful restaurant on the first floor. So the deal structure here is the city has formed the LLC. We're renovating the building. I think it's going to cost us around $2 million. And then we're going to sell it for appraised value. Not what it costs. We're going to sell it for appraised value because that's one of the huge market failures in all of Vermont, but particularly in secondary markets, which is most of the state. Cost doesn't equal value. So why would the private sector do it? So We can do it, though, and absorb that hit, amortize that $300,000 hit over 10 years. Probably we'll have that paid off. That's what we do. So the building has a lot of potential. It has a lot of character. You can see that many developers before us have tried. The restaurant group, some folks out of Maine with long resumes in restaurants who also have a connection to Vermont. We're really excited about this project. Of everything I've told you so far, this is probably the most replicable. You don't need state approval. Well, you do for the tax credits, but you don't need state approval for the deal. And depending on your funding sources, you might not even need local voter approval. I always like to get it, even when you don't need it, because it gives you the best access to low-cost capital and gives you the most insulation from your critics. But forming LLCs to use the state and federal historic tax credits to do the deals that your planning boards envision, but that the private sector won't do because they can't make any money in it, can be part of the strategy for growing the education fund, equalized grand list, and solving our housing problem. St. Albans is a different place. I shudder to think about what it would be like if we hadn't taken the bull by the horns, made the investments, and transformed the community. I've shown you a lot of slides with a lot of money flowing through it. We've never raised anybody's taxes to do any of this. That's huge. You know, one of the things that I like about public-private partnerships is it's government investment, which the lefties like, and it's pro-growth and development, which folks on to the right of center like. It's the most bipartisan program and initiative that I've ever seen. You're using market-based principles to accomplish what the market can't on its own. So with that, I'd open it up for any questions. Thank you.
If there are any questions, just we'll bring the mic over to you.
Yeah. We don't have to have any. That's fine, too.
We got one here.
I'm really interested in that LLC scheme to access those historic tax credits. How did that exactly go down? Like the ins and outs of that?
Sure. It gives me an opportunity to make another point. I know about as much about real estate development as I know about municipal law, civil engineering, managing the city's pension fund. Not much. I know who to call. I get the right experts in the room. So I don't set up LLCs. I call the lawyers to set it up, right? So there's a legal team that's doing that for us, that's working with a accounting team. You know, it's a well-traveled path to use these LLCs. The only thing that's a little bit innovative is to use these tax credits. The only thing that's a little bit innovative is having a municipality as part of it. But we're not the first ones to do it. So, yeah, give me a call. I can dive into you deeper. But the broader theme is here. You don't have to be the expert. This is mostly about political will and risk tolerance. It's not about expertise. We buy all that.
We got another one over here.
Hi, I'm from Virgins, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what, if any, pushback you might have received on doing a local option tax from downtown businesses that might have been concerned about the impact on business.
Yeah, we didn't. So one of our beliefs is to create the wave for all this stuff, right? And so, I didn't have any slides on this, but when we're trying to sell an idea, we take out newspaper ads, and I'll do a lot of writing. Every week I usually do a Q&A type of thing, anticipating the questions or responding to actual questions that are coming in. And we create the wave just by saturating the market, both the print and the socials. One of the things that helped in selling the LOT was there's a Supreme Court decision, U.S. Supreme Court, called the Wayfair decision, which is what makes it apply to the internet. And so that takes away a lot of the arguments. And another beauty of the LOT is it's small enough to not have an impact on, it's 1%, right? Who even thinks about, we're in an era when you go to a cup of coffee and you make a 15% tip and feel cheap, right? So you add 1% on it, that's not a decision maker. And then it always depends on what you're using the money for. And so we weren't trying to use the money for things that only mattered to us in City Hall. We were using the money for things that mattered to the general public, and that we were trying to figure out how to fund. And so we were being very, we were responsive to public concerns. We did get a fair bit of pushback, but it wasn't from the local merchants. It was folks around the recreational interest and city and town stuff. So, yeah. Julia, you tell me when and I can stop.
Yeah, we've got another question for you.
Okay.
We've got a few more minutes.
Sure.
Yeah, so two questions.
Sure.
Appreciate how you sold the local options tax, but I didn't understand what the internet piece had to do with it. And the other question, the Fonda redevelopment project, there was something you did for the railroad in the back, and I didn't follow what that piece
Sure.
was.
So one of the first things you do if you're thinking about a local option tax is you hire an economist to estimate what yours is going to be. And ours came in at, the first estimate was mid sixes, so 650,000 or so, and we're poking at 8 now, just 5 years later or so. So the economist will help you figure out, hire the experts, right? The economist will help you estimate where it's going to come from. And a big part of that estimate is internet sales. It's not the old days where it was coming from Joe's snack shop. It's the internet that's driving it. And so, it's there's a huge equity argument here, and literally taxing the internet in order to reinvest in our communities who, I won't go so far to say that Main Street's being hollowed out by it. I think it's more complex than that. But Main Street needs help, and this is one way to do it.
Dom, if I can just, it's because when you order something from Amazon and it gets delivered to your house, Amazon has to pay that 1% tax to the city because that's where your house is. We also found out that if you order cable, there's also a LOT application to the cable bill as well. So we found there are various different places we hadn't thought that would actually provide LOT to the city.
Yeah, thank you, Chip. The railroad, St. Albans obviously is the rail city and has a long partnership with the railroad, and one of our largest, most strongest employers remains the dispatch center, which dispatches for short line railroads all across the country. And these are good jobs, 6-figure salaries. And the railroad at the time was looking at moving down to another community in Vermont with large amounts of vacant office space, fully depreciated. So they could offer really good deals. And so the town wasn't involved in all of that. That's just the market. So the city got involved and partnered with a private developer to build a brand new building in the back of the Fonda property. And we were able to compete with that deal because we were offering a better building at nearly the same cost without the disruption in their workforce. So, you know, I mean, economic development is it's a full contact sport, right? And communities need to engage in protecting their jobs. Otherwise, you're going to lose them. Yeah. One more and then we'll go, Julia?
All right.
Cool. Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about the TIF? I've never heard that before.
Sure. The
How do
TIF.
you even go about doing it? So,
Yeah. So there's the question was, what's TIF? TIF stands for Tax Increment Financing. There's a great info on Secretary Curley's website. You know, and the average tax bill in Vermont, for if you've got a residential tax bill of $4,000, $3,000 is going to the local community, and $1,000 is going. $1,000 is going to the local community for the municipal side, and $3,000 is going to the education fund. The education fund, of course, can't create tax base, but we can. And so TIF allows you to go to the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, come up with a plan, and say, we would like to build these public improvements. It's going to cost us this, but we think that that's going to create these private improvements. And those private improvements will provide the increment. Increment is the difference between what's there at the beginning and what's there in the future. And that increment will pay the debt service on the public improvements, and you can get a portion of the revenues that would otherwise go to the education fund, that $3,000 that I was talking about, to pay off the bonds. So in our case, we said we want to build a hotel. It's going to be worth $10 million. We need a parking garage so that they have a place to park. It's going to cost $10 million, but we can pay that off over 20 plus years if we have access to the tax proceeds, not just from the municipal side, but also some of the education side. And then after that 20 years, the education fund gets all that they were going to get it anyway. But without TIF, there's no hotel. So give me a call or Google it. You know, we can talk further about it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dom. And thank you to the City of St. Albans for hosting us, for letting us go see some of these projects, and for showing us all of the great work that you're doing. Now we're going to take a quick break, take about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back for our panel, Funding and the Secret to Crossing the Finish Line. So please go and have some of the pastries if you haven't already. For those of you in the back, there are still seats up here in the front. So, you know, feel free to come closer, make your way, take a seat, and we'll be back in 15 or so minutes. Okay, everyone, we're gonna get started. If everyone wants to kind of get ready, sit back down. We have a couple more tables up here in the front too for anyone that was standing in the back that wants to sit. So feel free to make your way forward, and we're gonna get started with the Funding and the Secret to Crossing the Finish Line panel. Your panelists are up here. Sarah Lang, our VCDA board member, is going to moderate this panel, so I am going to let her take it away.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. As Julia said, my name is Sarah Lang. I am a brand new VCDA board member. I also work at Northern Border Regional Commission. If you don't know us, we are a federal funder who serve Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and New York, so check us out. Today I am moderating this fabulous panel, Funding and the Secret to Crossing the Finish Line. With such an expansive panel, I'm asking our panelists to keep it concise, but I know they could talk about this for hours, so please feel free to find them at lunch if you want to have more in-depth conversations about what we're talking about today. So for our introductions, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, short and sweet, and also answer the question, what is one of the most inspiring projects you've seen funded, and one reason why it's inspiring? So David, we'll start with you.
All right. So good morning, everybody. I'm David White, president of White & Burke Real Estate Advisors. And among my many bits of history is that I was actually president of this organization back in the 1980s. I couldn't tell you exactly which year, but it was probably like 1986 or something like that, which gives you some indication of how long I've been involved in the field of community development here in Vermont. I could go on about my background, but I won't bother to do that. If you're interested, go to our website and take a look at what it says. But in the interest of keeping it short and sweet, go right to the question of a project that I find inspiring. And it's so tempting to pick one of my own projects, but I'm not gonna this time. One of the projects that has happened in the state of Vermont in the last half dozen or so years that I greatly admire is the Putnam Block project done in Bennington. And it was done by, largely led by the group M&S Development out of Brattleboro, and I know we have at least somebody here representing the Brattleboro area. And the thing that I find so inspiring about it was their determination to make it work and to put together the various funding sources. There are over 15 funding sources involved in the capital stack that made that project happen. And that's the kind of thing and the initiative and the determination that's required to make projects happen. And their ability to pull that off is nothing short of a miracle.
Thank you.
I'm going to stay sitting so you can't tell that he's taller than me. Also, if David looks upset, it's because he lost his Bluey balloon up here. So think of him during this time. So I'm Alex, commissioner at the Department of Housing and Community Development. We're giving Southern Vermont a lot of love here because the project that comes to mind for me is Bennington High School and the redevelopment there. While it's still in the works, and we're really hoping that gets closed out and finished. What's inspiring to me is again the capital stack, but what got that capital stack as complex as it is to where it is. Can't even tell if this is on. That's okay. I'll hold it anyway. Is that it took so much coordination amongst different agencies, different entities to understand how our pieces would fit together, how they could complement and leverage each other. And so it fostered so much communication that now is going to have positive benefits beyond just this one project. And so anytime you can do that, I think that's really good for Vermont.
Good morning. My name is Cooper Babbitt. I'm the operations director at the Chamber and Economic Development of the Rutland region. We are a combined Chamber of Commerce and Regional Development Corporation, which serves Rutland County down south. The most inspiring project I'll name is the Killington Forward project. This is a project it's a very small community in Killington, but with great assets in a large ski resort. They went out and got a TIF district and then followed that by seeking every grant they could to support these projects, municipal projects. They got the first $3 million award from NBRC and the EDA. They went out and got a RAISE grant for their roads projects, and all of that is to facilitate a significant private investment in a new ski village at the base of Killington. So I think it's a good example of kind of what Don was talking about earlier of braiding the TIF process, public sources of funding, and also private development.
Good morning. I'm Bonnie Waninger with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and I'm the project and funding specialist, which means I help local officials identify, prepare for, and access all types of funding, from both traditional grants all the way to complex tax credits. My inspiring project is something a little different. It's the Jeffersonville flood reduction effort. When you talk about communities that lack capacity, Jeffersonville was one of those. And they worked with the town of Cambridge cooperatively to improve their economic environment by lowering flood water levels. They identified what the plan was. Water is a threat to our village center, both for housing and economic development. They developed, starting with a hazard mitigation plan, then used studies and community engagement to look at solutions and move it forward. They got a lot of buy-in, not just from residents, but also from businesses and funding organizations. And the Lamoille County Planning Commission provided grant writing, grant administration, and project management support. So they reached out and they brought in outside capacity when they didn't have it. Prior to this, the village and the town hadn't worked together, and all of those agencies, LCPC, VTrans, Department of Environmental Conservation, ACCD, VEM, not only did they bring money to the table, they provided partnerships and technical services and flexibility. So what I love about this project, why it inspires me, is it exemplifies the concept of it takes a village to make it work.
Hi, I'm Jenna Lopaczynski. I am a field service rep with the Preservation Trust of Vermont, and PTV is the statewide historic preservation nonprofit, and our mission is to build community through the preservation and revitalization of historic buildings, downtowns, and village centers. And my role at PTV is to manage our Paul Brune Revitalization Grant Program. So PTV applies to the National Park Service, receives that federal funding, and then subgrants it out to projects around the state. And so that means I get to live in that wonderful world of both being the recipient of federal grant funds and then subgranting those funds out to other projects. And I think that gives us a pretty unique perspective to some of the challenges and opportunities that we see intersecting with a lot of these projects. And my inspiring project is the Albany General Store and the Albany Community Trust. Yes. And really, I had the opportunity to see that project from those early conversations of neighbors missing their store in town and seeing them work through that process of forming that 501c3, having the difficult conversations about no one in our town can give money to this project. How are we going to fundraise? To having a really successful local capital campaign, and now being able to go to that store and see the wonderful relationship between the operators and the community members, and to have that resource back in their village center. It was just really inspiring to be a part of and to see them do small-scale community revitalization through their general store.
Like I said, they could talk for hours on the things they love. Love the Southern Vermont highlights, considering I came from my home in Brattleboro this morning, so appreciate the love for Southern Vermont. And I will say MBRC awarded funding to 3 of those 5 projects. I did not tell them to name those projects. That just shows you kind of the breadth of the funding that we give out. Before we head into the questions, I just want to mention on each of your tables is a handout. So a lot of the funding sources that are going to be mentioned during this panel are on that handout. Unfortunately, I don't think there's enough for everyone, so at the risk of volunteering Julia for something, maybe we can email a PDF version of this out later, so you don't have to furiously scribble down notes, and hopefully you guys can share. And there might be some on the back table, potentially. So just keep that in mind, that they're mostly written down for you. So for this first question, I want to know what your top 3 favorite funding sources are and why. I know you probably have a top 10 or top 50, but like I said, we have to keep it short and sweet. So we'll just go back down the line, and then the rest of the questions will be more popcorn style, if you will.
It's really hard to pick 3. And I think we could all talk about a lot of the funding sources that are going to come up in the line. The first of my 3 favorites is the Robert Senserbo Fund. This is actually a small preliminary planning grant that the Preservation Trust of Vermont has. And in the realm of your $45 million housing project, the RSF grant probably won't be super helpful. The grants are usually $500 to $750. But for those communities who have a building and don't quite know how to wrap their heads around what that building needs, both in the short and long term, the RSF grant program can be very helpful. It pairs communities with architects, engineers, people who have special skill sets like window restoration, slate roof, obviously preservation. I come at this from a certain angle, but also helping communities understand how to plan and execute a capital campaign. Not a fundraiser to do it for you, but how to get your community members to kind of understand that process. It's a great way to move projects in a small, meaningful way, and it's very flexible, and we can give out multiple RSF grants to the same project. So I would encourage you all to reach out and learn more about that. Second is the Village Trust Initiative, and this is a partnership between the Preservation Trust of Vermont, the Vermont Council on Rural Development, and the Vermont Community Foundation that is aimed at building capacity in communities of 2,500 or less. So we're looking at either creating or bolstering a community trust to then take on a transformational implementation project. And so we have rolled out our first cohort of 7 projects, but we're looking to fund 20 projects over many years, probably 5 to 7 years. And I think it's really important that we're in Swanton in the northwest portion of the state today, because we want good geographic distribution with our project types, and we haven't funded anything in northwest Vermont yet. So if the idea of creating a community organization like the Albany Community Trust to help support this wonderful leadership at the municipal side, but to kind of build that local capacity on the nonprofit side. And this is really designed to be a program to help create something in a community that can then lead to a transformational project now, but also build more things into the future. And then last but not least is probably the one that nobody likes to talk about, but is really important, and that's local fundraising. It is such an important part of community revitalization projects. Local fundraising is frequently your most flexible dollars, so when you're looking at pre-development cost, contingencies, cost overruns, it's really hard to back federal and even state funding into a project, but local fundraising can be such an important piece of that puzzle. And helping groups understand that, whether it's a municipal project or a nonprofit-owned project, and then helping them learn how to do it so they can go out and be successful. Those are kind of the things that we love to do. So those are my 3.
I will start out with federal tax incentives. Dom mentioned putting together an LLC this morning for a housing project. But there are energy tax incentives municipalities and some nonprofits can use that don't require an LLC. Congress opened energy tax incentives to non-tax-paying entities. So that's opened the door to new thinking about community investment and capital stacks for municipalities. These are energy specific, so they can be used for building your climate-friendly municipal fleet, for solar and geothermal projects for municipal buildings, things like community centers, town offices and garages, and for EV charging facilities. So when you go get that EV charging grant, on top of that, you can apply for the federal tax incentive and get a portion of your money back. So claiming these after the fact tax incentive buys down the cost of the original project, but when you get that money back, it provides ready cash for your next project. It's considered your local funding, so it's flexible once it's in your hands. The second one I love is disaster recovery grants. I don't so much love the disasters, but I love the grants that results. And if you talk to Julia here, she'll tell you about the disaster money coming through probably the CDBG program. But USDA Rural Development, U.S. Economic Development Association, Natural Resource Conservation Service, FEMA, NCCC, which is the Conservation Service volunteer group, and even the Vermont Outdoor Recreation Collaborative, they all had disaster recovery funding. The question was, is your community ready for it? Do you have the plans in place so that when we get hit by those disasters, you can say, I've got a project, let's move our economy forward. They're my favorite. It's one of my favorites because they're the extra that give you access to more funding than is usually available. And finally, I'm going to talk about the Vermont Bond Bank. We know that taxpayers loathe taking on debt, and most municipalities do. But when we talk about large personal investments like buying a house, buying a car, major home improvements, we readily take on that debt. So the question is, why do we hesitate to allow our municipalities to take on that debt? We often borrow in anticipation of taxes. So why don't we use that financial tool? The one thing about the bond bank is they can help your staff or your community determine what its debt capacity is, so that you're not over leveraging debt. And you can use that to help convince your taxpayers that that's a great place to think about investing in your community. And they fund everything from water and wastewater to transportation infrastructure and energy investment. And more recently, flood recovery. So I encourage you to get to know them. I think that Michael had to step out for a call, but he's in a gray sweater. Find him and talk to him about that.
The first of my three favorite, I'll say it again, is the NBRC, and in particular the Catalyst grant. This is an awesome tool for municipalities and nonprofits, primarily focusing on infrastructure projects, and is really a tool or a catalyst to private development. And these take a wide range of applications. Looking at Rutland County in particular, the Killington project has a Catalyst grant. There's an NBRC award for our industrial park, hoping to move some water and fire suppression lines to a new developable area. And they recently got an award in this past year to the Paramount Theater, which is expanding. So I think those three kind of give you a wide range of the types of projects that are possible through NBRC, and it's a rather large sum of money, up to $1 million typically for infrastructure projects. The other two, coming from a chamber and a regional development corporation, are really more business focused. And I think a lot of times in these conversations we forget about how grant money can support individual private businesses. The first tool that I'll talk about is the regional economic development grants through the Department of Buildings and General Services. This is a grant that can go, the applications are processed and applied through the RDCs, but on behalf of private businesses. I see Bill Moore from Brandon in the front here, and he always sends me some referrals for these. But these are relatively small grants, but they're easily accessible because the RDC who's applying on your behalf is able to do a lot of the actual grant writing and work really alongside you in terms of developing your ask, submitting it, and then helping you deliver on the project. And then the last isn't a grant, but it's revolving loan funds. The RDCs, including ours in Rutland County, have revolving loan funds that can support businesses. We typically serve as kind of gap financing, so a business will go to a traditional lender or VITA for the bulk of their financing needs, and then come to us when there's a gap to fill, whether it's financing a part of the down payment or on a small project. We kind of serve as a great resource for those types of needs. Our fund in particular can fund anything from $5,000 to $250,000 of a project. And the added benefit is that if you're working with an RDC on this type of project, we're able to provide additional services, connect you with other state programs, connect you with the Small Business Development Center to really provide a more wraparound service along with the financing needs.
So no surprise, I'm going to name a few sources that come from DHCD, mostly because the staff is here and I want them to be happy. So the first one I'm going to mention, familiar to a lot of people here, the Community Development Block Grant administered by the Vermont Community Development Program. What I love about this is, firstly, it's very versatile, and of course, if we're talking implementation grants, it can be that really critical piece of funding that closes out a project. But what I really, really value is the planning grants from this source, because this can be an incredibly valuable tool for communities to re-envision a parcel, try to solve a problem that they just need that little bit of help with. And so that's an incredibly valuable tool that then can get you to that next project stage. I need to talk about the Vermont Housing Improvement Program, because VHIP has been an incredibly valuable tool. And again, you're going to sense a theme in my remarks here, but this has an outsized impact in smaller communities. In southeastern Vermont, it's been incredibly used. In Rutland, it has been incredibly impactful. And so VHIP, while this is, this could be rehabbing apartments, it's also converting our structures to make better use of them. It could be bringing a structure back to life and taking that old Victorian and turning it into 3 or 4 units. So it's been incredibly valuable. And it's also getting funding to folks that wouldn't access the traditional means of affordable housing funding. So this is really opening up a whole new source of folks that can start pitching in to contribute to affordable housing in Vermont. So it's been really great. The Municipal Planning Grant Program, again, we have asked a lot of our municipalities over the last few years when it comes to updating their zoning, updating their bylaws, changing the way that they oversee development in their communities. And so this is a tool that they can access to make sure that they can still keep pace. As we're asking so much of them, they can keep up, and this is giving them a little bit of capacity and resources to do that and to just re-envision what they want their community to look like. And then the last one I'll mention is the Downtown and Village Center tax credits. And Caitlin Corkins is back there, and so if anybody has any questions, she'll talk in more depth. But again, this is another tool that can have an outsized impact in small communities that wouldn't necessarily be at the top of the list for some of these other larger funding sources. This could help you reinvest in our structures. It could be a facade. So property owners within these areas can really keep our rural downtowns and villages healthy and vibrant, which is such an asset to Vermonters. St. Albans is a great example where property owners here have made great use of the Downtown and Village Center tax credits.
So also no surprise, number one on my list is, wait for it, TIF, tax increment financing. And as you may know, my firm, mostly Stephanie, our vice president, who's back there, you'll be hearing from in a while, has set up 7 of the last 8 TIF districts in the state of Vermont. So we know the program pretty darned well. And the thing that's so powerful, I mean, Dom stole my thunder entirely on this earlier, but one of the things I want to emphasize is the flexibility of the funds. They, unlike so many other grant sources that are very targeted to very specific things, this can be used for all kinds of public infrastructure so long as it is somehow tied directly to stimulating private investment and new private development or redevelopment. And so the ability, once a community has a TIF district set up, the ability to then go out and negotiate deals to figure out what are the stumbling blocks for this specific project and how can we use TIF to step in and help solve that problem makes it a tool that allows a community to initiate and to make projects happen. Underscoring in slightly different terms a point that Dom, I think, thread throughout his presentation earlier is that I very much see that TIF and other tools, and I'm going to talk about a couple more in a moment, are a key part of what I believe is so important as we move forward as a state, and that is for municipalities to begin to see themselves as entrepreneurs, because projects aren't going to happen. They simply aren't going to happen unless you step up as a municipality and are willing to take risk. Dom talked about that. But you have the ability to take risk in a way that private business, believe it or not, doesn't have the ability in so many cases. So it's municipality as entrepreneur and TIF being the single most powerful economic development tool I believe we have in the state of Vermont. Second thing I want to talk about, which ties into this, is master leasing. One of the biggest challenges right now when you're building housing, as I think many people know, is that the cost to build the housing often, usually right now in the state of Vermont, exceeds the value of that housing after it's built. And no private investor is going to step in and no lender is going to step into that kind of scenario. So what do you do? And there are a lot of different pieces to that. I talked about the capital stack of 15 different sources for the Putnam block in Bennington as an example, and none of these things alone solve the problem. TIF alone won't solve the problem, nor will master leasing, but master leasing can be a piece of it. If you can go to one or more local businesses and get, maybe it's just one apartment, but get a business to say, yep, we will guarantee, we're going to lease that apartment for 10 years. We will take the risk on that apartment, and we will give first preference to our own employees. If we can't lease it to our employees, no employee who wants it, we'll lease it to somebody else in the open market. But those guarantees, if you can get enough of that building pre-leased, on, say, a 10-year commitment from local businesses who've got a real stake in their ability to be able to bring in employees, you're solving a problem for them, that then starts to give the kind of confidence that allows other investors and lenders to step into the deal. So the third thing I want to talk about is closely related but different, but does relate to the local fundraising. I want to talk about local fundraising not in terms of seeking gifts and grants, but in terms of investments. That one of the keys in the Putnam Block project in Bennington was that they went to 3 local major institutions. They went to the hospital, they went to Bennington College, they went to the local bank, and all 3 of those stepped up as equity investors in the project. They also, I don't know if all 3, but some of them at least, stepped in and master leased some of the spaces. They played 2 different roles, both as investors and as tenants, in effect, in the project. Very, very critical. That project simply would not have happened without that. And if you think, as you look around the state at our communities, most regions, let's put it this way, have major employers. I mean, I think about, say, Cabot Creamery in Cabot, right? They've got a problem. How do they house their employees? Some of them are being housed in dorms at the former Goddard College campus. I don't know how long they'll go on, but they've got a problem. So could you go to the equivalent business in your regions and say, look, you've got a problem, we can help solve it. Your role here, step up with equity and master lease, and we will help you solve your problem.
Thank you. Now that we've heard about the what types of funding are out there, and obviously that's not exhaustive. We could go on about all the different types of funding out there. And actually at the back table that Julia mentioned this morning, there are those resources that have many lists of different types of funding. And as you heard from our panelists, that's not just grant funding, right? I think it pays to be creative in your projects when looking at what types of funding. Now we want to dig a little deeper. We want to get into the how. That secret to crossing the finish line with getting funding for your project. And so for our first question, and this, we'll just popcorn it, whoever wants to share can go for it. For projects that have just missed the mark in being awarded funding or securing investment, what is the most common mistake that you've seen them make? And what would have helped them cross that finish line?
I can kick off, and then
Great.
Others who are smarter can step in. What came to mind for me, and obviously I'm not involved at the granular level like the team here is in reviewing applications and making sure applicants get to where they need to be. And so by the time it reaches me, we're trying to prioritize. And so often, there's a couple things that leap to mind, but the one where we say, come back next time. And that's what we always try to say, is not no, but come back next time. And the reason we say that so often is when we feel like there's just somebody's not in the driver's seat, something's not fully baked, they came to us before they were ready. And that kills us to say that, because our goal is to help them get there. But there are certain projects where if there just isn't the right partnership, or there just isn't the capacity, just for some reason, it feels like the project just isn't there. In times where we're going to see dwindling resources in terms of hard funding, and we have to prioritize, it's going to be really hard for us to push those projects up the list when we feel like they just have too far of a road to go. Yeah.
And I'd say for those projects that do get that no, please come back next year, if the funder provides you feedback of ways you can improve your application and strengthen your project, take those things and run with them. Even if you're not successful with everything they may have provided in terms of options, taking control of the project, trying to make even that small, meaningful progress makes a world of difference. There's nothing more frustrating as a funder to say no to a project and then have them come back a year later and have it be the exact same application. We want you to succeed. Vermont is a small state. We are really invested in trying to get projects over that finish line. And I'd say, because Vermont is a small state, pick up the phone and call and ask questions. The other really frustrating thing is your project may not be the right fit for our funding source, but we know clearly a lot of funding sources, and if we're not right, usually we can direct you towards the people who might be able to invest in the project. And so take advantage of that small social network in Vermont, pick up the phone, call and ask questions, and hopefully your project will be one of those yeses.
Okay. I'm going to talk about the other end, not the after you apply, but the before you apply. And the most common mistake we hear communities make is not reading the notice of funding thoroughly, which seems like such a simple thing, right? You get all this grant guidance, you get the application, but you really focus on the actual application and telling the funder what you want and very excited about your project. But really you need to, when you do grant writing and funding applications, you're doing marketing. You're marketing to a funding source that developed materials to tell you exactly what they want to fund. It's the easiest marketing you'll ever do. So in that notice, they tell you what they want to achieve, what's important to them for achieving that goal, and what the rules and hopes are for their program. And it's the best project love letter you'll ever get. The notice of funding, what it really does is it tells you how to tell your story in a way that the funder, that speaks to that funder's needs. Your project story is your grant narrative. And by speaking to their needs, you make your project the most competitive it can be, but it also ensures you don't invest time in a grant application when you're really just not a match for that. And a lot of communities end up on our doorstep asking for help on things like, golly gee, now that we have the grant and we signed the agreement, we realize we have to have an audit that we didn't budget, and that's a professional audit that might start at $20,000. That will throw your project out of whack. Or there are grant requirements that they weren't prepared to implement. So read that funding notice, get out your highlighter, and go through it and say, what do I really need to do to get this grant, and is it the right match for me?
This is similar to Bonnie's point, but really understand how the applications are scored. Understand what the funder's looking for and what aspects of your project are going to score well and maybe not so well as they're being reviewed. I'll give one really critical example for NBRC projects. There are regional priority projects that are put together by the various RDCs across the state in conjunction with the regional planning commissions and other stakeholders in the community. And that plays a really significant role in the scoring in NBRC grants. So making sure that you're engaging with your regional partners, educating them about the project, submitting those applications for the regional priority project list will really go a long way in not only scoring well in the actual application, but also getting yourself a regional champion to help guide you through that process, and in all likelihood help you with some of the compliance and administrative work once that grant is awarded.
So I'll take this from a slightly different perspective, because so much of the work that we do as a company is not applying for grants directly, but rather looking for how do we package a project in a way that we can leverage and attract the private investment. We're constantly looking for how do we bring that private equity, that private investment into the projects that will solve or address a community need or what the community's vision may be. And so part of the challenge here that where I've seen projects not succeed is a failure in the will of the community to keep at it. You simply need to persevere, and that when you encounter that problem, to figure out what's the solution to that problem. And I'll give you a quick example of it here. I could give you many, but one quick example is for the building that's directly across the street from City Hall. When Dom and Chip and I were working on that project initially and trying to figure out how do we package this together, one of the things that we figured out early on that was going to make it impossible to move forward is there simply wasn't enough parking, and there needed to be parking on site. So what do you do about that? Well, that led to us buying an additional building that we didn't originally plan to buy in order to gain some excess land. Well, that was too expensive, so what do you do about that? Well, that led to us making the decision we're going to demolish that and build 2 new buildings in replacement. So where we had a 20-unit apartment building that wasn't in great shape, we now have 60 units, 30 of which are subsidized, 30 of which are market rate. So the project actually got better by persevering, solving each problem, and ended up with a much, much larger project than we would have had otherwise. But it's the perseverance, determination to see problems not as reasons to stop, but as just another stumbling block for which you need to find a solution.
Amazing, thank you. Julia, how are we on time? Okay. As the capacity coordinator at MBRC, I would be remiss to not bring up capacity. And I know the panel after lunch will definitely be touching on technical assistance and capacity. And I don't think I need to tell any of you here that an entity's capacity does not determine how important a project actually is. And so this question really focuses on how do you get around that capacity issue? If you are an entity that does not have the capacity, but you have the project or you have the idea, is there a loophole? Is there a magic bullet? What are your suggestions, or what have you seen as a process to gain that capacity?
You know, one thing that reassures us most as funders when we're looking at a project, and especially if it's a project with some risk involved, is how many partners are involved. And if capacity is a concern, you know, we're almost always going to very quickly advise that entity to seek a partner. And I think that could take a lot of different forms. I mean, there's going to be a lot more conversations now about ways that municipalities could take regional approaches to certain investments, whether that's infrastructure or other various needs. But Vermont, as we know, has a lot of small nonprofits, and at times they are asked in their community to do a lot because there's so many opportunities really to make investments to improve. Can some of these small nonprofits take on multiple large projects? That can be tough, and it can be tough to risk losing control of your project by bringing on a partner. But in almost every circumstance, when we see multiple strong partners coming forward in an application, that is going to reassure us that A, there's going to be capacity, and B, there's going to be multiple stakeholders with the will to advance that. So that removes some of the doubt, some of the risk for us.
I'll step back even a little bit further and say I think you really need to understand the scope of your project and what the capacity needs are going to be. And so I think starting slow and starting methodically in developing your project, even if that means going first to a planning grant, doing a feasibility study, understanding the scope and costs of the final project, and being able to use that information to develop your budget, prepare yourself for more of an implementation type grant of a larger dollar value, but it also will allow you to understand what outside resources you might need to accomplish the project. In the case of NBRC, there's the local development districts that are kind of baked in to the program that are able to assist with the compliance administrative aspects of grant admin. But it could mean seeking out a development consultant or some sort of outside assistance that you could then incorporate into your final budget for the project.
So we all know that sometimes your bench is full and sometimes you need to add capacity. There's a lot of capacity in organizations up here at the table. So adding capacity, it's a simple answer. Sometimes it is consultants you pay to help with studies, and sometimes it's folks you pay to help with grant writing, grant management, they're project developers. But there's also a lot of technical assistance and capacity assistance out there through regional and state service providers like the regional planning commissions, the regional development corporations, VHCB's READY program, and for the lowest capacity communities, the Municipal Technical Assistance Program, which has on-deck service providers who can help you. There are even federal programs that provide technical assistance that can add capacity for you in certain topic areas. You can go to our website, to vlct.org, search the word capacity, and you'll find, I think it's up to 2 pages now, where can I get additional capacity for my municipality? And it provides you some links to those organizations and some ideas for who might be able to help depending on your project type.
And I would second all of those suggestions. We love the READY grant, in particular at Preservation Trust of Vermont. But I would say, especially for smaller scale projects in those village centers, it feels like the same 12 people do a lot in towns. They're on the select board, the planning commission, the nonprofit. And I would say, look for an opportunity when you can to grow local capacity. There may be someone in your community that isn't one of those 12 people that may have some skill sets that would lend themselves to, whether it's grant management, grow it if you can, and hopefully that person then can go on and support additional projects in your community and maybe even projects outside of your community. But we've seen that happen with some of the community trusts, that they're able to pull people in who then learn how to do a USDA Rural Business Development grant and then work their way up to NBRC, and then maybe they're even going to deal with some HUD funding somewhere down the line. It's wonderful to be able to add capacity from the outside and grow it internally when you can.
I think, Jenna, to that point, in small towns, I think people have to be asked to join. I think it can be really hard to, see this group of people that are always, the movers and shakers. And so I think making sure you are extending that invitation and not just expecting people to show up at a meeting or whatnot is pretty key. Great, those were all awesome answers. Thank you. Probably our last question, just so we have time for questions from all of you. Name one thing that a successful project cannot do without when either seeking investment or applying for grant funding, and why? One thing. You only get one answer.
Talk to your funders. It's really important when developing a project and preparing to apply for grant. Obviously, read the NOFO in detail, understand if the program is a good fit for your project, but it's really important to engage with the people who are going to be assisting you through that application process. Not only does it give you some better insight into what they're looking for, what other types of projects may be applying, and the types of projects they funded in the past, but it's really an opportunity to find a champion for your project within the organization that will be funding. And if that particular grant application does not work out, they may be able to assist you in navigating for other programs. And if that grant is successful, they're now invested in that project and will continue to help you, seeking other funding sources to fill out your stack over the course of the project.
We're friendly, I promise.
So again, because my focus is on how you bring in private capital and private investment into a project, I think the one thing that a community and you as community development specialists cannot do without is a deep, deep understanding of how real estate and development finance works. And I strongly urge each of you, if you haven't already done this, to take a good hard look at, there's a national outfit called Grow America. It used to be the National Development Council. How many of you know about this organization? Raise hands. Grow America, National Development Council. If you don't, look them up on the web. They've got a program for a training and certification program called Economic Development Finance Professional, EDFP. I did this when it was a brand new program over 30 years ago. It's like getting a master's degree in real estate and business finance. Incredibly powerful. And that one program is what set me forth to do what I do today, about really understanding the deal, because you've got to understand the deal every bit as well as the private developer does, so that you can genuinely understand what are the gaps, how do we solve these, and make sure, pardon me, that they're not bullshitting you about it. You've got to understand it every bit as well as they do, and that program is an incredible way to get your career launched.
Those are both absolutely right. And then I just want to make a separate point that relates to a point David made earlier about you have to have a champion on the ground in the project or in the community that will not give up on it. And that goes back to David's point about problem solving. When you hit barriers, you'll hit barriers. You're going to have funders say no, that they're going to come back. You're going to have private developers that don't want to come to the project as developed. The projects, especially the complex projects that we've seen succeed, took a long time. But what they all had in common was somebody would not give up on it. And so if you have that in your community or in the project, somebody that just will not give up on the project, that dramatically increases your odds of succeeding. Anyone else down here?
And in addition to that, Project Champion, you have to know your story. You have to buy into your project, and then you have to go out and you have to be able to tell other people why it's so important, why it's worthy of these really scarce funding sources, why people should be investing in it. And so really work on that story. And you're going to tweak it a little bit depending on who you're talking to, but you've got to have a great one. And once you do, I think it becomes a lot easier to get people to engage and invest in your project.
And one thing successful projects can't do without is robust community engagement. And I'm pretty sure the level of the room just went, oh, not that again. But before a project even begins, when you're at that project idea stage, that's how you build the team who will help you, those other volunteers. It's how you get town leadership on board. It's how you get your taxpayers on board. But even as importantly, it's how a project builds towards when it's constructed or a program is there, what's the ongoing operations and maintenance. So your community engagement doesn't stop when construction happens. You keep doing it. We all have good ideas for building community vibrancy. I bet everyone in this room has at least 5 ideas. But ideas need supporters to ensure they're developed and to make sure they meet the community's needs. So as you read those notices of funding opportunities, I think you'll find that a lot of them ask about how you secured community support, how you engaged. It's different wording they used, but they want to know it's more than just your idea, that it's actually something the full community wants. And we all know that those required meetings are necessary, but we need more than that these days. Sorry, folks, you need to be in the media, you need to be in social media and many other places, and you need that one place that is the go-to source for information so that the community knows where to go to trust the information they're getting. It's the one voice that speaks for your project. If that's your website, but make sure people know where it's at.
All right, thank you so much. Let's give our knowledgeable panelists a round of applause, and then we'll do questions. Looks like Chip has the microphone in the back, so feel free, raise your hand.
Yes, I have my mic on this side, and Elise has one on that side.
Great. Did we solve all your problems? Good job, guys. Yeah, James.
Thank you guys so much for such an awesome panel. I have a question just about sort of organizations and nonprofits in local communities working together, because I think one thing I've noticed is there's often a lot of duplication of efforts, and different people maybe like trying to do similar things but not communicating. So, you know, whether that's like a funding or capacity restriction, do you guys have any advice on like if there are programs or funding sources that specifically look at like reorganizing local organizations, or how to like increase collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, I talked about the versatility of CDBG before, and the planning grant in particular has been used recently for small nonprofits in the housing space to look at whether there would be benefits to mergers or you know, partnerships. And that's happened certainly recently, but also in the past, and I think that's an opportunity. That's a good use of the planning grant.
I would say on a very local level, I've seen communities that have lots of nonprofits. start with monthly or quarterly meetings, so they have a representative from each of those groups come together and they talk about what they're working on, what funding sources they might be looking at, and especially in communities where there may be some competition between them, maybe having a neutral facilitator come in and help that community look at what all of their assets are, what all of these groups are doing, and see if there's a way that they can work together a little more cohesively.
Any other questions? We're standing between you and lunch. All right, well, will you all be around for lunch? Great. So feel free to seek them out. Thank you again.
Thank you, Sarah.
Before we break for lunch, we're just going to give our platinum sponsors, which are White and Burke and ACCD, a few minutes to just talk and tell you about their organizations and really speak on their participation in VCDA. So just bear with us a few more minutes before we go to lunch while we hear from our wonderful sponsors. We're very thankful for them to be a part of VCDA.
All right, thanks, Julia. You just heard from me a lot, so I'm going to be brief here. I'm commissioner at the Department of Housing and Community Development, and of course, a number of our members of our team are involved, and of course, Julia, who's part of our team, is the president here. So we're really grateful to be involved with this organization. And what I would say to you, bring the message back to your communities. It's a message you heard before. Interact with us. Interact with us early. If you have a project, if you think there might be an opportunity for a project in your community, just reach out to us. We've got 4 divisions, so while we fund, we also, the historic preservation function goes through us. Community planning and revitalization as your community thinks about what the future might look like. And of course, we've got the housing division, but all we want from you is to just make sure that you know we are accessible and we have a staff that's eager and ready to help. Your project's going to be far better off if you know that we're engaged, we're involved, and we understand what your goals are. So I just want to thank you all for the work that you do, everything that you bring to your communities. Obviously, the work we do at the state really is just in support of you. So thank you for all of that. There's going to be a lot of talk about housing and community development this legislative session, so just keep an eye out. But what I'll say right now is please reach out to us. When you see opportunities in your community and you think the legislature or the administration could change something, could help you, could serve you better, reach out to us. That's how we're going to be informed, and that's how our reforms are going to be most supportive of you. So anyway, thanks for coming together today, and thanks for this. All right.
I'll make this really short too, because I hate standing between people and lunch. But I am Stephanie Clark. I'm the vice president of White and Burke. I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old at home. And when I'm not with them, I need to know that what I'm doing is making the world and Vermont a better or more viable place for them and for the future. And I suspect that may be a motivator for many people who do the work that we do, many of you in the room. When I have to be away from them at bedtime, for example, it's really hard to describe what we do, like public-private partnership negotiations and select board meetings, describing that to a 4-year-old. So one day I thought, how do I describe what I do? Mommy makes towns happy is how I describe it. So that was my idea, and we grew that up to being the tagline for White and Burke, helping communities thrive. And so that's what we do. We are helpers on teams. We help with negotiations, and as David talked about, TIF districts, tracking and navigating financing and funding sources. On the table back there, there's a list of funding sources David was referencing. It's also on our website. There's a link there for resources. And we really fit into a project team for municipalities doing complex projects and handling big challenges. So thank you all for being here and doing the work you do to help make Vermont a better place to live and for the future generations. Thank you to VCDA for bringing together everyone today for the resources. And if you can describe your work to a 4-year-old, I'd love to hear how you do that. And if you ever see my little Thatcher, just tell him, just validate that I'm helping make towns happy. That would be very helpful. All right, enjoy your day. Thank you so much.
So thank you again to our platinum sponsors, ACCD and White and Burke. If you work for an organization and you want to be further involved in VCDA and you want a chance to stand up here and talk about your organization, we'd love to have you be a platinum sponsor. So just something to think about for the future. But for now, everyone, please go enjoy some wonderful food from Nellie's here in St. Albans. There's sandwiches, there's soups, help yourself. We've got about an hour, a little more than an hour. So we'll come back here at 1 o'clock for our next panel. Thanks. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started again with our next panel. I hope everyone enjoyed lunch from Nellie's. Little round of applause. That sounds like you enjoyed it. Great. We're going to have our next panel, which is the Compliance and Technical Assistance Resources panel. I know it's right after lunch. They're going to do their best from keeping you from falling asleep after eating. This is a great group, so I know they're going to do a wonderful job. We have Katie Buckley from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, who is a new VCDA board member, here to moderate this panel. So I'm going to let Katie take it away.
Thanks, Julia. I have to drop that. Thanks, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to be a new VCTA board member. I see so many familiar faces out there. Hello. And I missed this morning, so I feel like we might duplicate some things, but some things might be worth duplicating. And I like to think that, grant administration is that other side of the funding. It's so exciting to get a grant application in and a big celebration when you get that grant award, and then comes that other side of making sure that you spend the money the right way, making sure you keep the money the right way. And we have a group of people here today with us who hopefully we can make this fun. I have confidence, right? We have a good bunch. We've all done grant administration side of things, and we're all fun people. So here we go. So I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, and then from there we're going to have a little bit of a conversation, answer some questions, and then we're going to leave plenty of time at the end for your questions, and hopefully we can answer them. And at the very end, each one of these experts is going to give you their top 3 tips, tricks, and takeaways. So Patrick, shall I just go to the right? Sound good?
Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Sheld. I am with the Vermont Community Development Program, which administers the state CDBG program that was spoken about a little bit earlier by Commissioner Farrell and also Secretary Curley. My role there is the administrative services manager. I basically manage the grants management staff, and our particular role is compliance, monitoring, and evaluation of all VCDP and CDBG grants that flow through across our desks.
Thank you. Diane Meyerhoff, principal of Third Sector Associates. I'm primarily a nonprofit consultant and grant writer.
Hi, folks. I'm Ryan Oth, and I work with the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, and I manage our Rural Economic Development Initiative, which we love our acronyms in Vermont, so it's called REDI, R-E-D-I. And that program really supports small rural communities across the state. And for us, small rural means less than 5,000 in population. And we support them with advancing a range of community-based economic development projects. And how we do that is that we provide small grants for technical assistance, usually in the form of grant writing consulting support, but can be a range of other technical assistance as well that can support folks with being successful with applying to, securing, or utilizing significant grant funds.
Hi, everyone. Greta Brunswick. I'm a senior planner at Northwest Regional Planning Commission based here in St. Albans. We serve the counties of Franklin and Grand Isle, and we're one of 11 regional planning commissions throughout the state, coordinating and working with our municipalities on a variety of community development and municipal planning projects.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Before we start going with questions, a little bit about you. How many people here today live in a town of 10,000 or greater? Okay. How many 7,500-ish? Okay. How many 5,000? How many 2,000 or less? Excellent. How many 1,000 or less? Excellent. So 2,000 or less, ding ding, we have a winner. Thank you. That helps understand sort of the landscape out here. So Patrick, I'm going to start with you, our regulator. As the funding landscape has changed over the last 3 years, with all the money that's pouring in and will be pouring in, there's more coming your way.
There is more coming, yes.
How has that changed the compliance landscape?
Well, the biggest thing that I first thought of in terms of compliance, I mean, especially when you look back over the past 3 years, is the additional requirements that are now coming with the funding. There's always been, so with the CDBG dollars, it's federal funds, and there's always, and from HUD, so there's always going to be Section 3 involved, there's always going to be Davis-Bacon involved. But within the past couple of years, there's now BABA. And that is a big one. That adds a lot of complications and needs to really start with the compliance at the pre-development, at the thought process, when you first have that idea of, I think we can have a project here, reaching out to the funders and, I mean, getting that communication started early in order to meet some of those regulations. You need to be thinking about that one from the very beginning.
And if I can just help with acronyms, BABA,
BABA,
is
sorry,
Build
thank
America,
you.
Buy
Yes.
America. I'm going to help you, don't worry.
Build America, Buy America.
And Davis-Bacon and Section 3 both have to do with wages, correct?
Davis-Bacon.
Generally.
Yeah, generally. Davis-Bacon has to do with wages. Section 3 is ensuring that if there are going to be new hires as a result of the project, that you're doing your best to attract and hire low-income workers.
Excellent. Thank you.
You know, I think beyond that, with the challenging, you know, it seems as though the availability of funding has been a bit fluid. Like there's been, over the past 5-6 years with COVID, a whole influx of funds, but now those funds are drying up. And so the fluidity of that is, you know, the conversations we're having now are no longer about, you know, how diversified can you find the different funding that's out there, because our funds do come with a lot of regulations, and we'll work with you to see if we can find maybe some state funds that don't have as many regulations. But now it's about, with those funds starting to dry up, yeah, now we need to start having those conversations about how far we can expand our funds and what we can do to help you through that compliance. And we do have a lot, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit, of strategies and guidance that we get into to assist you through that process.
And what would you say are the most challenging requirements for your grantees?
I mean, currently it's the Build America, Buy America, but beyond that, I think one thing that surprisingly that we do find that people trip up on a lot is procurement and bidding requirements, and making sure that they're documented properly according to the federal regulations, that they're posted in the proper places, and that they're advertised and the outreach is appropriate. And that all of the exclusions through like sam.gov and the Secretary of State's office are checked as well. Surprisingly, it's the procurement and bidding that seems to be one of the places where we find some of the most hang-ups.
Great, thank you. Are there things that funders can do up front to help their grantees be set up for success?
Yeah, absolutely. As a funder, what we try to do and try to accomplish is as many guidance and technical assistance meetings as we possibly can do. With the HUD regulations and the federal regulations, there is a ton of information, and we do not expect you to be an expert in it in the first instance, in the first meeting that we have, and we drop all of these, you know, this binder of compliance requirements that you have to follow. And the challenge for us as the funder is trying not to put too much on you, but at the same time share enough to show what it is going to be compliance-wise and what the requirements are going to be that come along with these funds. And So we try to offer as many pre-award, post-award, application technical assistance, and we always do believe that we're available. Pick up a phone, email us, contact us. We like to pride ourselves in being available, at least at the Vermont Community Development Program, and accessible to be able to talk through challenges and regulations. While we are in some instances, the messengers, because we are the ones enforcing these regulations from HUD, while it might seem like sometimes too we would have all the answers, we might not, but we're going to find it for you and we're going to work with you. We want your project to be successful because we want you to spend our money. It makes for quality of life factors, and it just makes for a better Vermont the more we can get these projects completed. So I think what we try to do is work through and try and develop some compliance plans with each of the individual projects. Yes, Davis-Bacon is going to, these wage decisions and wage rates are going to apply to the project. We'll work with you to develop a plan as to how you're going to address that and how you're going to meet that. Help identify somebody within the project team that's going to be reviewing the timesheets and completing the interviews. As well with BABA as well, Build America, Buy America, working with you from the very beginning. So I think, as funders, every funding source is going to come with its own regulations. Certainly the federal ones are going to have stricter, but as the project developer or as the one putting the idea forward and trying to build and get your project going, don't be afraid to, I would say, ask the funders to help you talk through some of those compliance issues. A good strategy too, I would think, would be to call some of these funders together and have an all funders meeting and understand where some of these compliance issues might overlap each other, and so that you might find an instance where, if it's a federally funded project and you're getting federal funds from not just HUD, but maybe USDA or EPA, they're all going to require Davis-Bacon. Is there an instance where you can just follow through and report it once or complete one certification and send it to 3 separate funders? So you're not having to duplicate your compliance 3 separate times in order to satisfy each. And ask the funders that. I would say have that conversation with them. Is what are you looking for? And you tell them that you're already doing this for somebody else, and would this suffice and meet your requirements for your program and for your compliance?
And how to address conflicts that might arise as well between programs. So there's this is where they're consistent, and this is where they conflict, and figuring out a plan and how to address that.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. I mean, communication's key, and I think that was a theme from the first panel, but I think...
Early and often.
Yes, early and often,
before
please.
It becomes a problem. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to just take a step back, because I know many of you are from very small towns that CDBG may not be the top thing on your list. So I'm really more on the TA side, although I'll say that the thing I find so impressive about the VCDP staff, Patrick's organization, is that they really are helpful, and you can actually get them on the phone. And I have done a number of grants, I primarily do federal grants. There is no one to call. And if you may get someone to talk to once you go through a cohort training, which could be 6 months. And you just send an email to this info@departmentofenergy.gov, and it just goes into this, you may not hear back for weeks. So I think it's just really important, so when you do look at funding, if you're looking especially at federal funding, it might be very different among departments. And I think VCP is one of the ones that really will work with you. But that's not always, great communication, absolutely, but in some cases it's actually not possible. Mm-hmm. So these are just important things to think about when you are looking at what kind of grant sources am I going to go after. And as I said, I generally do federal, I generally do larger towns, municipalities, although through the READY program, which Mariah will talk about, I work with some of the smaller towns. But I keep coming up against the difficulty of using federal money, especially for a really small town without a lot of capacity. Remember, we talked about capacity. And it's difficult to hire someone to do compliance. It's not like you can hire a grant writer, we're a dime a dozen, but not on the compliance side. So just something to think about when you're looking at the landscape. What is this going to involve? We've had a lot of trouble with, well, I shouldn't say it that way, right? Congressional directed spending. People didn't know It was a very simple application. They got the grant, pretty big federal grants, but they had no idea all these rules were going to apply and more.
It's not a check.
It's not.
It's
okay,
not
so
a check.
what are my
It goes on the
gems?
back of a
I'm gonna share what
program.
my gems, because free money isn't free. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think this panel is going to help you understand. And I always encourage people to do, this happened this morning, fundraising, absolutely. Local money without a lot of strings on it, wow. If it's a small project, $5,000, I would really encourage you to do that instead of the cost and the time, which is really a big issue for a limited capacity. So those are just my couple of things I wanted to add on to.
Sure, thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah.
And you can pass right to the right to Mariah. So can you tell us a little bit about Ready? What types of projects do you see most often, and who is the entity that's bringing them forward to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the Ready program, we really work with a pretty wide range of projects. And so our purview is dictated by legislation that created the program. But again, we have what we like to call bumper rails, but we try to be as flexible as we can within those. So the projects that we're working with are in a few main categories that are our focus areas. So community-based economic development is one of our kind of widest buckets, and I think applies to a lot of the work that you all are working on. So that can look like things like infrastructure, water and wastewater, or maybe more kind of community-centered infrastructure like a community center or a child care center, libraries, public parks. We also do a lot of projects that are related to downtown revitalization, restoring historic properties for community uses. That is something we see a lot across the board. Is really in Vermont. We have a lot of historic buildings, and trying to renovate those and bring them back into use and create these vibrant spaces in our downtown. So that is a lot of the work that we do. The other two main focus areas that we have are in outdoor recreation. So that can look like trails development, pedestrian connectivity in your downtowns or village centers, and then also working land sector development. So that's going to be where we work with private businesses, which are farm, food, and forest-based businesses in these small communities across Vermont, and helping them apply to funding sources as well. In terms of the entities we work with, again, we try to be as flexible as we can there, but the best fits for us in that category would be municipalities, again, in that under 5,000 population category, but we also work with nonprofits and then also community-based organizations that may not have nonprofit status or may not be seeking nonprofit status, but are otherwise eligible to apply for these significant sources of funding.
Excellent, thank you. And your grants are small. They're between $1,000 and $6,000.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about what it sort of plugs in to a certain point in a project and fills a need? If you can talk a little about that.
Absolutely, yeah, thanks, Katie. So we like to call them small but mighty, but they are, in these days, inflation, they're between usually around $1,000 to $7,500 is usually where our grants land, though we do have a little flexibility around that based on the project. But really, these grants go towards technical assistance services, so they're not for like actual line items in the project budget or for building anything per se, but they're very specifically for technical assistance. And there has to be a direct connection to applying for or becoming more able to apply for a significant funding source. A lot of times those are federal grants, sometimes they're state grants. We've also started to work in the more private and philanthropic realm if folks need some consulting support to launch, a pretty significant donor campaign, for example. But yeah, so basically the funding goes toward a contract with that professional consultant to provide those services to the community.
And the word readiness appears in your eligibility stuff. And so if you can, what does readiness mean for you?
So readiness, and of course when I write it in an
Pun
email, I
intended.
spell it R-E-D-I, readiness, because that's the type of person I am. But so for us, again, like this small but mighty program, we know our awards are small, and we want them to have the highest and best use for the small communities that we're working with. We know folks are busy. We're a program that's trying to make these processes a little bit easier or more accessible, so we try to do that. As well, but that means that really when utilizing Ready, we're a fit at a really particular point in the project lifecycle. So there is an incredible wealth of partners and resources in Vermont to help small communities or larger communities with the kind of project ideation, with community engagement, with kind of building out what this project idea is, or that we have this vacant building and what would we like to do with it? What do we want to prioritize in that space? So there's some great organizations, and many of them up here as well, and RPCs definitely being one of them, that can chat a little bit more about how they can support at that beginning stage of the process. But for us, we're really a fit when that community engagement has happened, right? Like some of the key milestones for us in terms of readiness is that, the project is baked, or we kind of know what it is at this point, that we know what the project purpose is, what the scope is. If we're utilizing a building, we know, what the ownership structure will be, what the end use of that project will be, because that's how we're really going to know which grants are appropriate for that particular project. We're also usually going to want to see that permitting logistics and regulatory logistics have either been worked out or at least identified, and there's a plan and a process for how to move through that, because we're really best positioned to support projects that are ready to really look at and then directly apply to something as significant as perhaps a Northern Border Regional Commission grant, like we heard a little bit about in panel 1. So that's really what we're thinking about there. And then also I just wanted to note, especially in Vermont, there's really no wrong door. I am more than happy to talk to a project that is in that earlier stage of thinking through, what exactly are we, what do we want to do as a community with this space? I'm happy to have that conversation with you, refer you to a lot of the partners that we work with across Vermont, as well as funding resources, and if ready for whatever reason isn't a fit for your project, I'm happy to draw those connections. And I think all the folks on this panel and panel 1 are in a similar boat and wanting to make sure that we get folks handed off to the right resource.
How do you plug in around compliance, for grant compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's where, again, like I said, our core work is around supporting folks with the grant writing. But as I mentioned before, we do offer a variety of other types of technical assistance. And again, we just need to see that there's that direct connection to accessing or utilizing those significant funding sources. So some of those other forms of technical assistance that we can fund at the kind of beginning end of our project might be a feasibility study, looking at some projects might need an archaeological report if they're digging, and in order to access this grant they need to accomplish that task, and that is definitely something that we can support. There are a couple other organizations that can support this activity, but for historic buildings, there's an item called a historic Section 106 review that is required by a lot of funding sources and some that have been mentioned here today. And so that might be something that in order to progress and move forward, the group might need a consultant to do that report for them. And as long as we can establish that link with being able to access funding, that's something that our small grants can go towards as well. On kind of the tail end of an award, when a community has received an award, we are able to provide some grant management support there. I would say one of my tips later that we can get into as well is that hiring or bringing on a project manager for your project is such an incredible idea and is really a game changer for a lot of projects. And that's not something that, because the READY program is focused on kind of these discrete, specific projects, we're not the program that's going to fund an entire project management position. However, parts of that person's job might be a really great scope for a READY grant. So for example, helping setting up reporting systems or metrics tracking as you're thinking about managing a grant that you've received. That is something that can be a really great fit for a READY award.
Awesome, thank you so much. Greta, can you tell us about the role that RPCs can play in project development from ideation all the way through closeout, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That's a broad range.
Mm-hmm. So RPCs being scattered across the state, or covering the entire state of Vermont, 11 of us throughout the state of Vermont, with over 130. It's obviously a moving target, but staff covering the full state. As a governmental organization, we're uniquely positioned to coordinate and guide activities between municipalities and regional, state, and federal partners, right? And so one of those reasons why is because of our direct connection to municipalities. So I want to start here just explaining our connection, which really leads into sort of why what our role is with communities. But so we're directly connected through our Board of Regional Commissioners, which municipalities are represented on that board. So they are directly guiding our activities and mission of our board. So there's that direct connection. And then we're also have that direct connection with our state and regional funding partners through annual work programs, through VAPTA, the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies, and through various funding agreements from the Agency of Commerce and Development, Agency of Transportation, Department of Public Service, and many others. So we provide that link, right? And then, so because of that connection to municipalities, we have, a deep understanding through the day-to-day work, I think, with, what communities' needs are, and can sort of anticipate projects and sort of work with communities on identifying and navigating and matchmaking projects to funding sources. But now going back, Katie's initial question, sort of starting with that ideation, project development phase, identifying projects, I think through the life of a project, a lot of our role starts at that beginning phase, right? So whether it's through all of the different types of work, whether it's a needs assessment, through a feasibility study, through our regular municipal planning work, we're having regular conversations with communities about potential projects. And so, we're looking at building those projects up, building blocks, right? Sort of one over top of the other, making it into a project that could then be ready for potential grant applications. We're looking at scoping, community engagement, project support, starting to think about project costs, and identifying potential funding sources. So there's the project development phase of the project. We do a lot of that work and are, I think, particularly suited to that through our community connections. Going forward, grant writing, grant administration, some project management, and project closeout support is certainly a role that regional planning commissions are able to play. We coordinate with municipalities on, if it's not something that we have capacity for, we're certainly connected to other resources and sort of work on finding the right folks to be at the table to provide that support and move the project forward.
You kind of offer it all. So if a municipality
we have the ability to offer it all, and if we're not
shop.
offering it, we're sort of making the connection.
Yeah, connecting the dots, I like to call it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so if a municipality, do you work only with municipalities? Do you work with community groups? Who's your client, customer, for lack of a better word? Who can you work with as a RPC?
Right. So, we are primarily supporting projects that are going to further municipal and regional planning goals. And so we're not solely, we're working for our communities, but as such, we certainly can support nonprofit organizations or other organizations and community groups that are working on projects that are supported by the community and are otherwise furthering municipal goals. And so if we are engaged in another organization, a community group, and moving a project forward, it's going to be something where we are also communicating with that community, and it's going to be sort of like a multidisciplinary project where a lot of players are involved.
Great, thanks. I think I answered, that was the last question I had for you. Diane, we're going to circle back to you. What types of clients do you work with?
So I work about half-time with municipalities and half-time with nonprofits. And then I also work with what I call sort of quasi-governmental, like the RPCs. I do work for the RPCs. I do work for housing authorities around the state. So some of those kind of a little bit different, I don't know what we call them. I think quasi-government works, but about half and half.
So pretty much everyone.
I don't do a lot of for-profit business, although I have done some, believe it or not. I've actually done some USDA grants working with Ready. So some for-profits, but there's not a whole lot of money for profits, at least in my realm. So, yeah.
And what are the services that you offer? And of those services, which ones are you asked to deliver most often?
Okay. So I'd say certainly strategizing about projects themselves. I'm a big believer in a really solid project description. And everyone always moans. It's sort of like saying you want to do strategic planning, right? Everyone goes, oh, do we have to? But really having a really strong project description with goals and objectives, as Mariah talked about, is a great starting point. So I really encourage people to do that, because without that, we're kind of all over the place. And sometimes, halfway in, I think, wait a minute, what are we actually doing? So I really encourage that. So that's a piece I spend a lot of time on. But also, and sort of in general, I certainly talk to people on the phone, as Mariah does, saying, what are you really trying to do? Do you have some ideas of where you might find funding? And just being able to talk about the different levels of funding, like federal versus state versus sometimes even local funding as well. So that's kind of what I think of strategizing. And then help folks get through NOFOs, Notice of Funding Available, or Notice of Funding Opportunities. They are, 50 to 75 pages of bureaucratese, essentially, right? That you do them enough, you get a sense of it, which is kind of frightening, right? To think that I have a sense of that, but I do. So I help folks get through that, help them with the applications, putting the questions together. One thing I find with some folks who I adore, who don't do a lot of grant writing, is every question has the entire answer for the whole application in it. And I just throw that out there because I see it a lot. And I know it's the enthusiasm, which I so appreciate, right? There's so many things you guys are doing, but really helping you kind of pull it apart so that you're answering the right question, because that's really hard on readers. I've also read grants for organizations, and that is something that's really tough when you're trying to get through your matrix of how each organization is faring in the process. So help them with applications, help them with online assistance, figuring out how to do sam.gov and these various things that we threw out at you, but really trying to position you to really be successful with the grant application. I also try to be really honest about whether I think you're going to get that grant or not, based on at least what I've seen along the way for having done this for quite a number of years. So that's primarily. I generally stay away from compliance. I'm going to be really honest with you, even though this is a compliance panel. I've done some of it, but I will say it really takes a special person with a lot of time and interest in reading minutia, from what I can tell. Yeah, and you're going to get it wrong. I mean, that's the other thing. We didn't really talk about that, but it's often, even with all these great folks helping you, sometimes you still just can't break through. So I do that occasionally, but I really, honestly, I try to avoid it.
And I think that
I wish you could too. But
it's inevitable, right? If you accept the grant, you have the compliance
it's inevitable
piece.
unless
it's like
the
a marriage.
world really changes, which I could happen. I don't know. I mean, some of it is we have to have compliance, right? We have to spend money wisely and well, and we all want that, right? It's just a matter of how far that goes and how much you have to check on that. And we just have a lot, and we have a lot of overlapping stuff too that I think is frustrating for you guys, as for funders as well as those who get the grants, right?
And they're public funds. I think that's the critical piece, right? Sure. As painful it is. Pardon?
Yeah.
Thank you. I was going to say we have to be good stewards of
absolutely.
public funds, and it's painful, but it's necessary.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. So what do you, for the clients that you work with, what are the biggest struggles that you see? Is it capacity? Is it funding gaps? Is it both? Is it something else?
I think it is primarily capacity. A lot of the folks who hire me are larger, let's say municipalities. They're perfectly capable of writing these grants, but they're also trying to run a program, run a city. I mean, there's just too much to do, right? So I can often help fill in some of that. So that's not unusual, that's pretty common. And then there are other cases where there's not a lot of interest in actually writing the grant. They're so focused on having a project be successful and dealing with that side of it, again, a capacity issue. So I think it's primarily that. I think for ready clients, it's just a whole world that they don't know, which why would you, right? So you need someone who can help kind of shepherd you, I think, through the process. Yeah, I think that's primarily, yeah.
And for a small town that says we can't afford to hire a consultant for anything, what do you tell them?
I love this idea of raising local money.
I have to say, and this is because I'm not a fundraiser, right? I'm a grant writer. So I always love, Christine Graham is the doyenne of fundraising in Vermont. And whenever someone says fundraising, I say, give Christine a call. She'll be glad to talk to you. And she and I have talked about this. And I said, Christine, I'm just going to send everyone to you. And she said, that's great because I don't want to write grants anymore. I said, perfect. You know? So, but really, it is important. It's important for a lot of reasons, but it's especially important when you really don't have the capacity to administer some of these really complicated grants. It's something to think about. In fact, we had a discussion about this just last week with a small client, saying, you know, does this really make sense for you? It's going to be a lot of effort. It is a lot of effort to raise money, but so which is one that is more palatable to you? And we talked this morning, someone talked about how important it is to raise at least some money from the community, right? To have some skin in the game. So I really encourage people to do that. And talk to Ready, talk to all these folks who are out here really wanting to help as well.
And so I'm going to just take the municipal side for a second, because that was the nonprofit, or the fundraising usually takes place at the community level. And so for a municipality,
not so much so though. Actually, I have had some very small towns be really successful raising money for community projects.
I'm going to say the thing that nobody wants to hear from a town.
Sorry, okay, I didn't say
Don't
that.
give all your money back to the taxpayers. I said it. So if you have a surplus, do something strategic with it. Don't reduce taxes and reduce your tax rate so that you're going to have a situation in the following year when your taxpayers say to you, why did my tax rate go up? It's like, well, we used that huge surplus to reduce it last year. So if you have a stable tax rate and you have a surplus, figure out something creative and strategic to do with your surplus. You'll have grant match. Put it away in some fund. Create a reserve fund. I'm sure there's folks in the audience here, I'm looking out and know a few of them, that you've created reserve funds with your excess funds at year end, that you have that money available on hand for a municipality so that you can take your town to into the next decade, into the next century, that you're looking to not just the folks that are writing the checks today, but the ones that will be writing the checks tomorrow and hopefully growing your grand list. Sorry. I digress.
No, I love it.
I digress.
I think these are really difficult times to do that. I mean, I live in Burlington. Need I say more? You know, we've got a $3 million budget deficit. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. We need a new wastewater plant. We need a, and I think people just get really overwhelmed. And if I heard, oh, we're going to put away, $1 million or whatever for, for the future, I have to say, as a taxpayer, I might be like, oh.
But it can be 5,000.
Well, yeah, okay.
Yeah, for the towns of 2,000 or less, that's where I'm coming from.
Well, but
even
maybe
5,000 is
I don't know.
Totally, but it's worth it. If your tax rate's stable,
I love it.
Consider it.
So local, that's one of the gems. Free money is not free. Raise money locally. Put money away if you have surpluses or a little extra, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, we're supposed to have 3. Find a local champion. That's something we didn't really address so much, but I have been amazed at local champions. Someone came, very small town, we're ready. I thought there's absolutely no way they're going to do this project. You know who it is. And I am amazed at the amount of money this particular person, who's not even fully retired, has raised for an incredible project in that town. So don't dismiss that, right? Because it's probably easy for me to say, right? I'm a grant writer, so I say, you guys go out and do it. But I really think it's something to think about. The champions in communities, I mean, you're in small town. I don't even live in a small town. You guys know. These are the people who are doing stuff. And if you can point them in the right direction and give them a little bit of help, boy, they can really change the world in a way you cannot do in a big town, I think, in a big city.
No project's successful without a leader.
Right? You need
That's
a
your local champion.
So look for that champion, wherever they may be. Reach out to them.
So since you did your 3, I was going to have it at the very end.
Sorry.
I don't know if you guys want to drop your pearls of wisdom now, or if we want to do some Q&A that might inform pearls of wisdom. Do folks have any questions out there? Don't be shy. Yes?
I was just wondering whether you all have a good rule of thumb for when to go after technical assistance and stuff like that. What's a right size? When you have a project, when you know, all right, it's going to be worth my time to go after.
So, question being, what's a good time within the project timeline to seek technical assistance?
What scale of project? At what point does it become beneficial to actually, go out and get technical assistance? At the end of the day, it'd be great to have somebody eat up a lot of the time anyway. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
I think I hear what you're saying. I mean, my response is early and often, is seek out, like, I think as Mariah was saying, you know, at VCDP, we're also willing to have those pre-project, pre-application discussions and strategize, help strategize, and to find out if your project might even be eligible for our program or not, depending upon the eligibility requirements. And then we might be able to point you in another direction into another funder as well. And you know, there are particular things like I had excuse me, as I had mentioned earlier, with Build America, Buy America. I mean, that is something now that you really need to be incorporating into your pre-development of the project because all source construction materials, and we're talking like iron, steel, lumber, concrete, sand, manufactured products, you know, your sinks, your toilets, your boilers that are going, it all needs to be manufactured, built, and sourced in America now. And that's going to create some potential timeline and supply chain issues. So the earlier you can get in and seek some of that technical assistance and guidance, the better off you're going to set yourself up for success down the line. Even if you don't apply for that funding within that year, you now know one of those compliance regulations that you need to be striving for so that when you are ready and when you figured that out, now maybe you're ready to put that application forward. And it's only going to make your application that much stronger as well, knowing that you've kind of addressed or begun to solve one of those compliance issues.
And BABA is just a federal compliance measure. So if you get a grant and it's funded through state funds, not federal funds, then BABA does not apply. But you could have a project that has state funds and federal funds. And Fed always yeah. I hate to use the word trumps state requirements. Mm-hmm. Sorry. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And your question about technical assistance, I think that it really depends on where you are in the project. You know, are you at the idea phase? Are you, you know, do you have a fully scoped project and you're looking for funding? Do you already have an award? But I think that having those conversations early with someone like the RPC or another TA provider can really help you understand what type of capacity you need for your particular project. And a lot of it depends on your total project cost, type of project, and then also the type of funding source and along the lines of federal versus state and whether what requirements are going to come along with that funding and implementation. But I think that to repeat what Patrick said, early is better so that you can really just have a good understanding and plan for that capacity and assistance.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add a little bit onto that too, and completely agree with what everyone shared so far. And I just think there is a little bit of a difference between seeking, assistance generally. I think early and often talk to all of the resources again that there's a very open door policy across funders across Vermont. We all want to work together. Sometimes it's helpful to bring us all together into a room. That's great. And I also very highly recommend for whomever is kind of like taking on this task with that volunteer group or with that project team, create a spreadsheet of who you've talked to, what they said, so that way should someone else pick up a little later, there's records of that, there's some identification of kind of what you've put together so far. But that, again, no bad time to reach out to anyone at any of our organizations or many other folks in this room for assistance. But I do think there's a little bit of a different point where hiring a consultant makes sense, because whether you're investing your own dollars as an organization or as a municipality, or potentially investing, public dollars like Ready, like what we're looking for when we're making that investment is that there's a scope of work, and there are deliverables and goals around that. And so really getting your project to the stage where it's like, to be fair, we connect folks with consultants all the time where they find out in the conversations with their consultant where, oh, we were asking for this, but really we need this, this, and this, and that's helpful and we're here for that. But being able to start that conversation seeking hireable technical assistance from a place of, we have some key steps in this project that we need specific technical expertise in. That's really where that investment makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of, again, free or low cost resources before that to really help get you to that place.
Sarah. Thank you, Chip.
So as a federal funder, I'm curious, in all of your experience during doing compliance for whether it's federal, state funding, what suggestions would you have for the funders to either simplify or streamline compliance?
I love that question.
Go for it. I mean, I know what I would say as a federal funder, but I mean, do you guys have suggestions for us as well? I mean, I would ask for checklists. You know, and you know, I guess in part of the way I like to think, and I know that this can be like almost drinking from a fire hose sometimes, but like throw them all at me, put them all out on the table. What is everything I'm going to need to comply with? What are the important ones? What maybe have I already complied with? What, looking at the different federal funding sources or even some state sources will have some overlapping compliance, and where can we kind of group things and understand that we're going to achieve compliance with one regulatory requirement that will satisfy 2 or 3 different funders. But I think asking for some checklists and helping to break down the process, because saying stuff like you need to comply with Section 3 for HUD, you know, that can be daunting. But the reality of it, what it is we just want to ensure that you are, if a new hire is going to be coming to the project, well, actually now it's based on labor hours, but that you're doing your best to hire low-income workers, and we're going to ask you to just post the job postings on HUD's website and incorporate 1 or 2 additional things, and then track labor hours. And knowing what those are up front will help with the compliance throughout.
That was a gem I just got. I didn't know you had to post it on the HUD website. Oops. Thank you for that. It's funny. Yesterday, I was looking through. I was trying to find, you know, what they call cross cutters, which is sort of where does these what is if you do an environmental review for USDA, will it also be accepted by HUD or vice versa? And I was looking through these very large manuals yesterday for a manufactured home park in Massachusetts, actually, that I'm helping to do some compliance work with. And I think the thing that's so hard about that is, I mean, they didn't have any checklists. That would have been a night. That probably would have cut some of my time down. But it was also, it seems like they're different enough that it's hard sometimes to even figure out, as someone who reads all this stuff, like me, fairly regularly, what really will work. And it almost feels like sometimes you have to submit it before you find out you did it wrong. And maybe not so much for you guys, but I've had this experience with the Department of Energy, I'll just say that fast, where I didn't even know I'd done it wrong until I'd submitted 3 of them, and 4th one, someone came back and said, "Oh, you've been doing these wrong." So it's kind of interesting. How do you simplify? How do you simplify something that's really complicated? And even BABA depends on the year of the. I mean, I guess from here on in, we're in all the way. We're all in now. Which, so if you were in earlier, God bless you. So I get the sense BABA might be a better one because it is pretty consistent across agencies, isn't it? No? Okay, see, that's the problem.
I'd say that's
there
a
you
no.
go. Okay, so see, I'm just making this up. So I guess the consistency would be really helpful, and I'm thinking environmental review, I'm thinking BABA, I'm thinking Davis-Bacon. There's 400 platforms you can report Davis-Bacon on, right? Boy, it'd be nice if we only had 1 or 2. Because you have to learn the system, which is, I don't know, for me it was 10 hours of training, you know, for guys, they were men who were installing EV chargers for 2 days. You know, I spent 15 hours doing the compliance for that. I got probably paid more than the contractor got paid. You know, so I think any way you could simplify, but I know that's not really something you're able to do as a federal funder, but if you could, it would be lovely.
I did hear that FEMA will work with other agencies to get consistency across regs. I did hear that. Yes.
That was
I
a
don't
gem.
know that, but I was told that.
100%.
And it was a FEMA person, so a pretty high level one, so I have to have a little faith in that. But it's a great question, and it's sort of out of all of our control, right? It's on a much grander scale that sort of consistency around that would have to, that decision is beyond all of us in this room. So, but we can tell our congressional delegation. What else?
Katie, could I add a couple quick
Yeah,
thoughts
of course.
to that?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Forgive me.
This is a great question, Sarah. I really appreciate it. And I guess, and again, speaking of like, what are the levers we have to pull, right? Because again, program staff want these things to be so much less complicated. As a funder myself, I wish all of the things were less complicated, right? But just thinking about, right, especially in Vermont, where we do all know each other, where we collaborate so well, where are there opportunities that we can all get together as funders and make this kind of common checklist or common app style thing for, hey, we're seeing that when these projects get funded, they usually have this source, maybe NBRC, maybe VCDP, maybe, several sources that we just see work together all the time. Maybe we can take that burden on as the funders to identify how to move through that process and which is the superseding, regulation, and make that a little bit easier for folks in certain ways and create those resources. The other thought, and some programs do this, is when folks receive an award to make them go through a training of how to do all the compliance and graduate from a workshop about how to do this properly. And maybe that saves everyone some time. But also thinking a lot about at the very beginning of the process, and I feel like also as someone in my role, I also apply to a lot of grants. I don't usually see in the instructional webinar about what kind of compliance is required. And I think letting folks know upfront what they're getting into is just a really helpful tool, because then at least then they can be thinking about, how do I prepare for that? How do I staff up for that? How do I get funding for the TA I might need to accomplish that? So those are just a couple thoughts.
Yeah, so not a lot to add there, but I think just along those similar lines, I think ensuring that the compliance checks that happen at closeout can a lot of times be more perhaps detailed than the information provided at the outset of the project. And so I guess my advice to funders would be to sort of think about what you're doing at closeout in terms of the compliance checks, and is there a way we can provide that more clearly at the beginning of a project that can help with compliance and for projects to stay on track.
And plain language is always super helpful too.
Oh, I love plain language. Who else? Questions?
I have a hot mic. I won't let it go to waste.
Oh, hello.
Just for the state folks in the room too. I think that levers that the state has on this is endowing more capacity in those regional entities like the RPC, where in a very small town you might have somebody who's seen like one project, right? Versus if you have an RPC where you can get some capacity going, you've got somebody who's more likely to have been around the block with a number of funding sources and knows some of these things that you can only know from experience like Diane's, right? Like if you've done NEPA, if you've done an environmental review for the EPA and for RD and for HUD, you may know that tribal outreach applies to all of them, but until you submit it and not receiving any response was fine for HUD, but not getting a negative response was not fine for EPA. Like I would love if there were like a matrix that crosswalks all of the federal crosscutters, but it is kind of unknowable. So how do you approach that? And I think putting some capacity in regional entities where we can share that knowledge more easily is an approach that makes sense to me, at least.
It would also be great if those stayed the same for just a little bit, so that as soon as you got your matrix done, the minute you hit save, it's not outdated, right?
It's crazy talk, Katie.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Danny? Yeah.
Yeah. Along the same lines about simplifying things, I'm just curious what y'all think about the reimbursement model and whether that's going to be a continued process in rural communities and how that could be a part of the simplification process.
Oh, right. Right to me, huh? So we primarily, with VCDP, do operate as a reimbursement process. And actually, that was going to be one of my gems. Understanding the timeline to access funds and the requirements in order to access them, because there are a lot of grants are reimbursable, and you have to kind of plan for that. What we instruct folks to do is to seek a bridge loan from a local bank and be able to show.
Or if you had cash on hand, you couldn't.
Or if you have cash on hand, of course, yeah. I mean, that's if you have the reserves and the ability to do such. But if not, then You know, some of the larger, certainly affordable housing projects, they'll get construction loans from like VHFA, and the flow of funds kind of ebbs and flows like that. But you know, I think what I've seen since I've been in this position, we've always been reimbursable, and I think for the foreseeable future, we still will be. It's a lot harder as a funder to put a lump sum out there, and then to then reach out and find those benchmarks to ensure that you're complying with the use of the funds. Whereas if it's reimbursable, you can show what you've done with it, you show your receipts and that you've paid the entity, and then we'll reimburse you no problem. It's that idea of kind of like stewardship that we talked about before, and unfortunately I kind of see that as a bit of a mainstay.
Can I just ask quickly, I do have an instance where an organization is having trouble getting that bridge loan. Do people always get them eventually from somebody if they keep trying? Or I mean, do you ever have situations where you can't, they don't accept the grant because they can't get the bridge?
Yeah, we've never quite seen that, and we don't want it, you know. We will try to work with you, and if that's the case, I don't think we would, our particular program, we wouldn't provide like a lump sum of the full $300,000 grant, but you would submit the requisition to us, and rather than reimbursable, we would give you enough money to pay those invoices that you provided to us, but you would have to show evidence within that the money reached its end user, that it reached the service provider within 10 days of us releasing the funds. So there's additional compliance when you look at it from that side. It's always about adding more compliance, right?
Right. Yeah, of course. But it would get them through, I mean,
it would.
It would be difficult if you have a highly leveraged project, right? That the bank just says, we're not going to be in 5th place.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, no, fortunately, we haven't seen something like that where they just return the funds.
And your grantees are municipalities.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So it's a little different.
Right, it's a little different in that sense, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, but if it's sub to a nonprofit.
Right.
They would be the one, the nonprofit would
They're
have
the
to
one
be
with the gap.
fronting. The municipality, I mean, maybe if you've got a good municipality that might have set some reserves aside, would have the capacity to front some of that for the small nonprofit, and then it's directly reimbursing the town who already kind of paid for the cost for the nonprofit. And there's a few different models and approaches, and again, the more you reach out to us and the more you communicate with us, we can have those creative discussions as to how we can get this flow of funds moving. And we want to have those discussions as well.
Anybody else want to take that question? No?
And they might be able to get debt from an unconventional source with a higher rate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. For that. Who else?
Reimbursement planning, planning for the reimbursement or a funding stack that includes a lot of reimbursement-based sources can be really, it's really important to have that squared away ahead of time, up front, and it can be really involved and time-consuming to organize those funding sources and the timing of reimbursement. But so I don't have any advice about how that's going to be restructured, other than it can get pretty complicated and time-consuming and sophisticated, and so you need a good project manager to take on a project that has those types of sources.
Absolutely.
One question you can ask your funder is if they cut third-party checks, they may not give you the money up front, but they may be able to pay your vendor directly. Mm-hmm. I don't know if this is helpful to anybody, but if you are going through A&R, definitely be prepared to be carrying 9 months of interest on your bridge source before you get that reimbursement.
More questions? We have a few minutes left. And if you don't have a question, or instead you have great information to share that would help folks in the room, grab that mic. So let's grab our pearls of wisdom. Sound good?
That's fine. I'll go first again. I'll be quick. The first one was that timeline to access of funds in the drawdown process, and making sure you're understanding once you've been awarded the funds, what do you need to do to get it? And that lends itself directly to my second gem, which is read the grant agreement. Yes. Understand all the factors that are within it. I know For our particular grants, we have attachment A, which is your project description, attachment B, which is your budget and the flow of funds, and then attachment C are all the state provisions, because it is ultimately a state grant, and then attachment D is talking about some of those federal compliance regulations, and read through it. And feel free to pick up the phone and give us a call and ask. And I would say that to for about any funding source or any grant agreement you get, read through it and then take some notes, highlight it, and then call the funder directly if you have some questions. And then the last gem that I'll drop comes back to communication. I think it also lends itself earlier to the question about when to approach for technical assistance, but call an all funders meeting. Pre-development all funders meeting for those that you think may or may not, you may not even be eligible for the project, but call them in, call USDA, call VHCB, call different state sources, historic tax credits. And what you'll be amazed to find out is when you put all the funders in a room around a table, they will solve your funding stack for you and your compliance issues for you, because they will talk it out, and all you need to do is sit there with a notepad and write down what they're talking about.
Record it.
Please. Thanks. Yeah, those are great. And I also had the talk to your funders on my list, so I'll add some extra fun ones. But I would say a great tip is just at the start of any project is just getting together your project team and thinking about these roles and responsibilities, because there's going to be some form of applying for funding going on, and there's going to be some form of managing funding going on, and working, if you're a nonprofit or another project team, just making sure that you're connected with your municipality and your regional planning commission, or if you are the municipality, figuring out who in town staff may or may not be able to contribute, where, what does that capacity look like, and really mapping out those roles ahead of time is super helpful. And also in the adding on to talking to your funder, a great thing to ask them is whether hiring a project manager can be part of your application to them in your budget that can do a lot of this compliance and administrative work. Another one, just in general, as my work is hiring a lot of grant writers for various projects, is that I have this conversation a lot with folks that grant writing is absolutely a team sport. It is something that even when you hire someone, whether it's through a program like mine or through available funds that y'all have, you are going to know your project the best, and that the grant writer is there to help, strengthen your argument, help you get through those checklists, help you dot I's and cross T's, and can add a lot of technical expertise as well. But that ultimately, embarking on that kind of journey is going to require time and energy, and that's just something that, again, we want folks to think about at the beginning of the process. And one of my other favorites, just kind of around grants and accessing funding in general, and actually someone in this room gave me this advice, I can't even take credit, is that grant applications are an open book test. They tell you exactly what they want to hear from you, they give you the language that they want repeated back to them, and your goal is to really make a strong case for your project that meets the goals of that funder, and to demonstrate, also part of that is demonstrating how you're going to meet those compliance goals, and that you've understood what you're embarking on, and that really helps strengthen your case. So those are my pearls.
All right. We'll say I try not to repeat anything, but I think we primarily, first gem, to make sure that you have a strong local leadership team. A steering committee, a group of committed individuals led by staff, ideally, if that is available in your community. Start with that. Start with a good local leadership team. Understand the capacity that your project's going to need. One of my gems was going to be make sure to build in project management to your grant application, so that you know ahead of time that you have the funding that will provide that for that needed, much needed feature of your project. Understand the funding requirements. Know if you're going to need to go after federal funding, because there are going to be requirements associated with the federal funding that would not come into play if you were doing a local capital campaign that was just locally fundraised or was using other types of non-federal funds. So understand if you're going after federal funds, get to know what types of pass-through requirements are going to come on board, Davis-Bacon, BABA, Section 3, others that might, procurement that will increase your project management needs and the timing of your project. So understanding that ahead of time and thinking about what that means when you're looking at funding sources is really important. Also, thinking about the level of project planning and scoping that is needed to make your project successful. And are the federal funding sources going to require more of that preliminary planning, engineering requirements that otherwise would not be. So talk to a good project manager or other technical resource that might be able to help you navigate that and understand what type of preliminary planning is necessary. And then related to that, thinking about the timing, the overall timeline of your project. Projects can take many, many, many years, and sort of going into a project thinking it's going to take 1 or 2 years, and then realizing that it's going to take 5 to 8 years can be pretty frustrating and overwhelming. So thinking about that ahead of time and knowing and looking at and learning from other projects that, okay, like we can stay the course, the project will happen, it's going to be really successful, but it can take a lot of time.
Great. Thank you. I just want to thank our panelists. You each play a vital role in the really amazing and often complicated projects that take place throughout Vermont that make this such a great place to live. And if folks could give them a round of applause. Thank you. And thank you. I'll pass it back over to
Yes, thank you all to our panelists. I just wanted to add in there too, this past Monday, myself as a VCDP funder, Caitlin Corkins with tax credits, folks from Preservation Trust, we met in Montpelier. We hopped in a minivan and we drove to the Northeast Kingdom to hear about a project, and then drove down to the Upper Valley to hear about another project. So we spent our day together and learning about resources. So in the spirit of this being a navigating funding post-pandemic, that's something we couldn't do for a couple of years. So it's nice to be able to come to your communities and see the projects you're working on, and in the spirit of early and often and having all funders meetings, just know it's something that your funders enjoy doing too. So think about that as you go forward. But for now, we are at the point where we're going to take another little break. Before we do that, I just want to mention, I forgot to point this out this morning, but in your packets, everybody has a green piece of paper at the end of your packet, and those are our surveys. VCDA relies on your feedback for a lot of our conferences. You know, what topics do you want to hear? How was the food? How was the venue? Anything else that you want to include information for us and our board to take into consideration. We do read these surveys, so please fill them out before you leave today. There'll be a basket on the registration table in the front for you to leave the folder in, leave the paper in, but please do fill out your surveys and return them, and they're anonymous, so you can say whatever you want. That said, we're gonna get into breakout groups after the short break we're gonna take. And so our thoughts right now are to have a few different breakout groups stay in this area, and then the walking tour, which will go outside and see some projects. For the options for the breakout groups, our plan is to have a breakout group around building a project budget. So if you're working on building a budget for your project, you would want to go into that group. We're going to have another group based on project-specific technical assistance and challenges you're having around technical assistance. So if you enjoyed this panel and you want to talk more technical assistance and project-specific challenges, that will be the breakout group for you. And then keeping momentum post-funding award. So if you're at a position where you've received awards for your project, how do you keep things going? What else do you need? Those are going to be the options for breakout groups. But can I get a show of hands from folks just on how many people think that they're going to go on the walking tour Is there? Okay, that's a good number of folks. Is there? I'm gonna just go through and see who's expecting to join, or how many people we're expecting to join, which groups. How many show of hands of who's thinking of joining building a project budget? Okay, project-specific technical assistance and challenges. Okay, and then keeping momentum post-funding award. Okay, so we're gonna have the walking tour, folks. After the break, you're gonna go into the lobby, get your coats, hats, mittens, whatever you need. You're gonna meet Chip in the lobby. Chip's in the back, he had the microphone today. So you'll go back there. For the other breakout groups, we're gonna have the building a project budget folks meet in the back corner, on the back left corner here over by the resource table. We're gonna have the project-specific technical assistance and challenges folks come up here in the front corner, and then we'll have the keeping momentum post-funding award folks come in this corner.
Julia, do we want to let one group use the council chamber?
Yeah, we'll have the group in the back that's meeting at the resource table then filter into the chamber room in the back, but we'll let the walking tour head out first. Thank you. So one more time, building a project budget in the back by the resource table, project-specific technical assistance up here, and then keeping momentum post-funding award on this side of the room, and then walking tour in the lobby. So go ahead, take another break, use the facilities, do what you need to do, get ready, and then at 2:30 we'll get into those breakout groups.